Chapter 2635. At this moment, traces of abnormality surged into Luo Fan's senses. Are there other cultivators in this space-time? Luo Fan's heart skipped a beat. He instantly understood the reason for this abnormality. One had to know that Luo Fan wasn't the first cultivator to enter the world of laws without an invitation. The fact that Luo Fan entered the world of laws showed that he wasn't the first cultivator to enter the world of laws without an invitation. Before him, there were not many cultivators, but there were definitely no cultivators who had all the advantages he had now. Under such circumstances, when with the countless nodes placed before the cultivators who didn't rely on the invitation letters to enter the world of laws become interested and develop the thought of exploring it. And once they did, it was only natural for them to enter this space and time. Therefore, no matter how one looked at it, Luo Fan would not be the first cultivator to enter this strange space-time. Before him, there would definitely be an unknown number of pioneers. Perception was also relative, especially in this strange space-time. When Luo Fan sensed the abnormality of the nodes, the cultivators on the nodes also sensed it. In an instant, they knew at the same time that a newcomer had arrived in this strange space-time. Compared to the cultivators in the outside world of laws, the cultivators in this strange space-time did not welcome the newcomer at all. On the contrary, at this moment, Luo Fan felt an indescribable repulsion being released from the nodes. It seems like there are not many of them. Sensing this repulsion, Luo Fan understood. This was normal human nature. It was like a game. For the veterans of the game, the more new players there were, the more they would welcome them. However, if the game had already reached the point where it was time to fight for the final reward, then the veterans who participated in the fight for the reward would obviously not be so friendly to the newcomers. Obviously, this world of laws was that game. The cultivators who had previously cultivated in this world of laws were the veterans of the game. Therefore, they naturally welcomed Luo Fan's entry into the lawless world. The strange space-time in front of them was clearly related to the final secret of this world of laws. For the cultivators here, this was clearly the place to fight for the final reward of the game. Under such circumstances, they were naturally extremely averse to the newcomers. Luo Fan did not pay too much attention to this repulsive force. He merely stabilized his body and released some repulsive force. The repulsive interaction allowed Luo Fan to have some idea about the characteristics of those cultivators. At the very least, he vaguely knew the route that these cultivators took. Because of the special characteristics of this rule realm, this place could be the hall of cultivators who walked the path of broad understanding, especially for those cultivators who entered this world without the help of an invitation. Under such circumstances, it was extremely normal for cultivators with unlimited time to choose the path that seemed to have a more promising future. Most of the cultivators in this strange space-time had chosen this path. Even the remaining cultivators seemed to fall between the specialization and broad understanding paths, as if they had to grasp both paths with both hands. To other cultivators, this kind of choice was a waste of time, and the advantage of entering this rule realm would be wasted. After all, the amount of energy needed for each specialization was comparable to that of the broad understanding path. If one were to specialize deeply in each source of rules, the amount of energy needed would probably be tens of thousands of times more than taking the broad understanding or specialization path. If a cultivator who entered this rule realm with an invitation chose this path, the outcome would be obvious. However, that was obviously only for those cultivators who entered this rule realm with an invitation. For these cultivators who entered this rule realm without an invitation, this choice was obviously not too much of an exaggeration. In terms of efficiency, it was much lower than the specialization and broad understanding paths alone. However, because this rule realm was filled with the source of rules, and with this strange space-time in front of them as a foundation, the efficiency was still somewhat acceptable even if it was reduced. At this moment, a voice was heard in Luo Fan's ears. Since you can enter this place, you must be someone who broke through the barrier of the rule realm with your own intelligence. You could be considered one of us. Now that you're here, we have something to say. Luo Fan frowned. He could hear that the voice came from a cultivator who was at another node. The voice was not concealed, and almost all the cultivators in this space-time could hear it. Judging from their reactions, it was clear that the inclusion of all of them had been agreed upon by them. In other words, this was the result of everyone's discussion. "Come on, fellow Taoist," he said plainly. The voice was transmitted to all the nodes through the connections between nodes. In an instant, all the cultivators in this space-time heard the voice. This change caused the cultivators to shiver slightly. To be able to grasp the connections between the nodes in such a short time after entering the space-time, and to use this connection to transmit thoughts and voice, this ability was quite extraordinary. This made their original contempt for Luo Fan weaken a lot in an instant. This kind of contempt was unavoidable. It was like the contempt and disdain that a king in a game would inevitably have for a rookie who had just learned to play the game. For these early arrivals, Luo Fan, who had just entered the space-time, was obviously a rookie who had just arrived. Naturally, they would feel an indescribable contempt in their hearts. Of course, even though this sort of contempt had weakened, it was only weakened. It was still impossible for it to disappear in the end. It was just like how a king in a game might view a newbie in a new light because of his talent. But in the end, it was impossible for him to acknowledge that the newbie was on par with him so quickly. That kind of contempt that came from the bottom of his heart would only disappear when the newbie truly became a king. This is the secret place close to the origin of this world of laws. The more people enter, the more difficult it will be for us to obtain the final treasure. Therefore, I hope that fellow Taoists will not bring anyone in. This is the only law of this space-time. The node that had spoken earlier said this again. Following this, waves of awe were transmitted from all the nodes. The meaning of the warning could not be more obvious. It was obvious that if Luo Fan did not agree to this, the many cultivators would probably turn against him. Luo Fan frowned slightly. He did not plan to bring anyone else into this strange space-time. After all, he did not have a deep friendship with any cultivators in this world of laws, or even in this place. Even if there were cultivators he knew, they were only at the level of acquaintances. However, this did not mean that he would gladly accept these cultivators' warning. This was because he did not want to do it, not because he was being threatened. Now, he felt that he was being threatened. "You guys are too nosy. I don't think you need to agree to what I should do," Luo Fan said indifferently. As expected, sighs came from all over this strange space-time. Then, a huge power began to appear out of thin air from all directions around Luo Fan, like countless space-time, pressing down on him. These powers did not come from the same source. In other words, it wasn't unleashed by a single cultivator. Instead, it was unleashed by thousands of cultivators at the same time. Through all sorts of mysterious and subtle methods, they combined to form a terrifying power that had reached the level of a three tribulations cultivator. At this moment, Luo Fan felt that the space-time around him had completely stagnated. The space-time that could change according to his will had become the toughest thing he knew in the blink of an eye. Even if he wanted to break through the space-time, he would need to accumulate power for a while. Obviously, accumulating power at this time was equivalent to courting death. The countless streams of light floating in the surrounding space-time stopped flowing at this moment, and were in an extremely strange state of stagnation. Through this stagnation, Luo Fan finally saw the true nature of these streams of light. They were all illusory sources of laws. They did not have any form at all, and they did not even have any color. The reason why they looked like countless streams of light before was because these sources of laws were constantly flowing and changing. At this moment, because of the stagnation of space-time, these sources of laws also stopped for a moment. This time, their true, formless essence was revealed. Facing such an attack, Luo Fan's eyes narrowed. His light of the earth condensed slightly at this moment, turning into a water droplet that wrapped around his body. The tip of the water droplet gathered nearly half of the power of the light of the earth, according to his will, and directly faced the power that the thousands of cultivators gathered at the same time. All sorts of formless explosions instantly resounded throughout this strange space-time. The power that the many cultivators gathered at the same time was naturally quite powerful, and their teamwork was also quite tacit. However, it was still a combination of the power of many cultivators. No matter how perfect, flawless its structure was, it was still inferior to a technique unleashed by a single cultivator. Under such circumstances, this kind of power would naturally have flaws that shouldn't have appeared. For ordinary cultivators, at least for those who were weaker than third tribulation powerhouses, this kind of flaw would not matter at all. At their level, even if they knew that there would definitely be some flaws, they would not be able to find them. That was because even though the flaws existed, they were too obscure and subtle. However, compared to Luo Fan, the situation was different. Even though Luo Fan could only display the power of a tribulation initiation powerhouse in this place at this moment. However, his essence was that of a powerful existence that was about to trigger the seventh Great Tribulation. This essence gave him an unimaginably sharp perspective, allowing him to see things that were tens of thousands of times more powerful than ordinary cultivators at this level. The flaws that were extremely obscure and subtle to cultivators at this level became extremely obvious to him. Of course, if he only relied on the strength that he could currently display, even if the flaws were extremely obvious to him, he would not be able to do anything about it. After all, it was still the power of a third tribulation powerhouse. No matter what, the flaws were still equivalent to the power of a second tribulation powerhouse. Even if he found the flaws, he would not be able to shake the power of a third tribulation powerhouse purely by relying on his own strength of a tribulation initiation powerhouse, let alone completely disintegrating the power of the power through the flaws. However, it was obvious that Luo Fan was not the kind of cultivator that could purely rely on his own strength. Back then, he had paid a huge price to simulate and condense his light of Earth. After that, the light of Earth continued to absorb the endless laws and mysteries of the outside world, allowing its essence to continuously improve and sublimate. By now, its power had already vaguely surpassed the level of a second tribulation powerhouse. In this way, after it condensed its power, it was obviously effective against the flaws of the power. For example, at this moment, when the terrifying power was crushing towards Luo Fan from all directions, the tip of the light of Earth in the shape of a water droplet had already undergone a subtle change the moment it came into contact with the power. It directly pierced into the subtle flaw that existed in that direction, penetrated deeply, and then exploded with a loud bang. As the terrifying power stirred, it instantly expanded the flaw by 1,000 times. Following that, the power of the light of Earth flowed towards the endless power in the surroundings and instantly embedded itself into the cracks of the power of the many cultivators. In just a few breaths, all the power had been completely disintegrated. Good move. A praise came from somewhere. Chapter 2636. Among the cultivators in this strange space-time, some were strong, some were weak, but the strongest one was only close to the third tribulation. Close to the third tribulation meant that they were much stronger than the second tribulation. Ordinary second tribulation experts were no match for them, but they could not compare to the third tribulation experts. The reason for this was not that they were much weaker than Luo Fan. It took them countless years to reach this level. Instead, it was determined by their own nature. Cultivation was not a straight line, but a curve. This was especially true for the many cultivators in this place at this moment. For them, cultivation was to find their own strength and realm. In this way, the lower their realm, the greater the help brought by their own nature, and the faster they would improve. In contrast, when their realm kept improving and getting closer to their nature and their true realm, the help brought by their own nature would become less and less, and the speed of improvement would naturally become slower and slower. When they reached a certain realm, when their own nature could no longer bring them enough benefits, the help would completely disappear, and the speed of improvement would be similar to when they were cultivating without any foundation. At this moment, this was the situation encountered by the many cultivators in this space-time. When they had improved to the level of the third tribulation, the benefits brought by their own nature had almost completely disappeared. If they wanted to improve, they could only cultivate honestly, break the shackles bit by bit, and climb up bit by bit. The difficulty of this was self-evident. If they followed their own path of cultivation, this speed of improvement could be considered considerable. After all, this was the realm they had walked through. However, at this moment, none of them followed their own path of cultivation. Their own path of cultivation was extracted from the various lands or perfect lands. Such a path of cultivation naturally contained endless extraordinary characteristics because of the special characteristics of the land. This extraordinary characteristic caused them to be completely confined by this place after they entered. Under such circumstances, if they wanted to regain their abilities and extraordinary abilities, they could only start from various natural phenomena and changes in the mortal world. Through this phenomenon and change, he would improve, refine, and sublimate, breaking his shackles bit by bit, allowing himself to obtain effects similar to extraordinary powers. It was just like how Luo Fan set off through heat, while Chu Yao set off through waves after being killed by Luo Fan. The cultivators in this strange space-time, no matter what route they took, all started from similar changes and phenomena. Clearly, none of them were compatible with their own complicated and indescribable paths of cultivation. Under such circumstances, their current cultivation was equivalent to continuously advancing on a completely unfamiliar path that they could not identify with. They wanted to achieve something comparable to the path they identified with. Just thinking about how difficult it was enough to make one's scalp go numb. It could even be said that the fact that they could obtain the strength of a tribulation stage powerhouse or above was already the result of their understanding of cultivation reaching an unimaginable level. However, even so, approaching the third tribulation was already their limit. Moreover, this was not the limit for all powerhouses. Many powerhouses did not even reach this level. Of course, powerhouses who did not reach this level had a rather ordinary status among the many cultivators. However, they would not be driven away. After all, this strange space-time was a secret that they grasped. This secret was so big that it was enough to concern the greatest secret that could possibly exist in this world of laws. Under such circumstances, these cultivators would naturally try their best to hide the existence of this space-time. Under such circumstances, once a cultivator entered this space-time, even if they were unwilling and the other party's strength was weak, they would still have to give the other party a share. Otherwise, if the cultivator was dissatisfied and leaked this secret, the competitors that they would have to face would not just be the weak cultivator. Instead, there would be hundreds of millions of competitors. The weak cultivator did not pose much of a threat to them, and they could still suppress him. However, who knew what kind of powerhouses would appear among the hundreds of millions of other competitors? Perhaps one of them could appear out of nowhere and suppress all of them. Due to this consideration, even if the cultivators were not strong enough, they could still stay in this space-time to cultivate and search for clues about that strange treasure. The cultivators who were left in this space-time were naturally more determined to deal with the latecomers. Since they were not strong enough, the increase in competition would obviously affect them the most. Under such circumstances, the latecomers were more proactive in dealing with them, and they were usually the first ones to make a move. Luo Fan only needed to ponder for a moment before he understood the situation. However, at this time, he clearly had no intention of exploring this secret with the other cultivators. At this moment, he only showed a faint smile on his face and transmitted his voice to the many nodes. What about now? The nodes fell silent. Although it was only one move, the many cultivators already knew that Luo Fan was not easy to deal with. For cultivators of their level, a single attack represented almost all attacks. If one attack could not deal with the opponent, then more attacks would be meaningless. We were too reckless. At this moment, one of the cultivators said. Luo Fan smiled faintly when he heard that. We apologize for our rudeness. However, we still insist on our previous thoughts. Fellow Taoist, You better not attract other cultivators here. Otherwise, it won't be a good thing for all of us. The cultivator continued to speak. That depends on my mood. Luo Fan did not let his guard down and only said that. Hearing this, the other cultivators were naturally not satisfied. After all, this was related to whether they would be able to obtain the final benefit. Only an idiot would entrust this matter to the other party's mood. However, at this time, one's strength was stronger than others. Although their combined strength was stronger than Luo Fan's, because it was a joint effort, there were still flaws. In the end, they could not suppress Luo Fan. Under such circumstances, Luo Fan did not guarantee or promise anything, and there was nothing they could do. At this moment, another cultivator sighed and said, "Actually, there's no need to be conflicted. Even if fellow Taoist brings people here, they won't be able to see this space-time in our eyes. This space-time actually doesn't exist for them." Bewildered voices came from all directions. Obviously, this was something that the cultivators did not know as well. It was only at this moment that they heard about this from a cultivator. This situation made them feel a little bewildered at this moment. "Fellow Taoist, are you serious?" One of the cultivators asked anxiously. Of course, we should have thought of this long ago. For the cultivators who entered this place with the invitation letter, they can't even see the truth of the world of laws. How can they see through the space-time that is hidden behind the truth? For them, they can't even step into this space-time. If they observe this space-time, they can only see some special nodes of the origin of laws. The cultivator continued. Hearing this, all the cultivators knew that this person must have done an experiment and brought people into the space-time. This violated the rules that they had agreed on. However, no one questioned this person at this moment. They were all thinking about the impact of this situation. The appearance of such a situation represented a fact. That was, perhaps the precautions they had taken over the years were unnecessary. If the cultivators who entered this space-time with the invitation letter had no chance to step into this space-time, what exactly had they been guarding against all these years? In order to maintain this balance and to maintain this rule, they have fought so many times and even delayed the exploration of this space-time. What was it for? For a moment, some cultivators couldn't help but question the cultivator why he didn't let them waste their time, even though he knew this. However, after thinking about it, they couldn't say such words in the end. After all, this was against the rules. If they did it publicly, they might be attacked by everyone instead. If that was the case, the cultivator would have suffered greatly, and the benefits would be given to all the cultivators. If they were in the position of sacrificing themselves for others, they wouldn't do it either. If it wasn't for the fact that the situation was a little stiff and this was a rare opportunity to publicize this matter, the cultivator might not have come out at this time. So that's how it is. The cultivators could only sigh in the end and remain silent. The momentum, aura, power, and might that were originally targeted at Luo Fan also completely dissipated at this moment. Obviously, since bringing in other cultivators wouldn't have any effect on them, they naturally didn't need to fight against Luo Fan, who was obviously able to fight against all the other cultivators. In the blink of an eye, Luo Fan's place became empty. It was as if all the changes that happened before had never happened. At this moment, Luo Fan's expression also relaxed a little. He had gone against all the cultivators earlier only because of the pride in his heart. He didn't really want to bring some cultivators in. At this time, the other cultivators no longer objected or forced him, so he was naturally happy to relax. At this moment, he didn't say anything and just sat cross-legged on the platform. He began to carefully experience the platform, and then through the resonance between the heat law source in his body and the endless heat law source in the outside world, he absorbed the huge amount of principles and mysteries that existed in the heat law source. As he began to fall into silence, the surroundings returned to how they were before he arrived. Everything that had happened before had already been buried in the dust of history. Time passed bit by bit, and in the blink of an eye, 100 years had passed. During these 100 years, Luo Fan's strength improved again. Unknowingly, the strength that he could exert in this place had already reached the level of a second tribulation powerhouse. The reason why he was so fast was naturally because the cultivation environment in this space-time was too amazing. Under such a wonderful cultivation environment, the principles and mysteries contained in the source of the heat law that he absorbed at every moment were thousands of times more than in the outside world. Given these benefits, it wasn't surprising that he could obtain such benefits in just a short 100 years. As he raised his cultivation realm to the level of a second tribulation powerhouse, the strength that his light of earth could exert also increased to the level of a third tribulation powerhouse. After all, the light of earth was completely condensed by him, and its strength and power were clearly linked to him. Since he had improved, the power of the light of earth would naturally improve as well. Of course, such an outcome did not bring about all the benefits. After raising the strength that he could exert to the level of a second tribulation powerhouse, he discovered that the heat energy in his body seemed to have entered a state of saturation. Although he was still barely able to absorb the principles and mysteries emitted from the origin of the heat law, his absorption speed was already many times slower than before. Only his body and his view of the world were not affected much, and they were still constantly absorbing the nutrients that existed in it. Looks like there's still a limit to an incompatible path. Sensing this change, Luo Fan sighed inwardly. In the end, he still couldn't completely break away from this limit that a normal cultivator should have in this place. Chapter 2637. On this day, the entire strange space-time suddenly shook slightly, awakening Luo Fan from his cultivation. With a slight thought, he knew that several years had passed since he felt that his strength had been increasing at a slower rate. At this time, a powerful aura emerged from the many nodes in the space-time and began to sweep through the entire space-time. Even though their strength was much weaker than theirs, they were still experts in the tribulation realm or above. This space-time was probably a bit special. Compared to them, it was really too special. Auras filled this space-time. They didn't even need to use any strength. They just needed to relax a little, and they would be able to do it. Boom, 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 boom. At this moment, the entire space-time shook even more intensely. Is this a law wave? However, it seems a little different from the previous law waves. At this time, Luo Fan had already made a judgment in his heart. After being in this space-time for such a long time, he had already encountered the eruption of law waves many times. After so many eruptions of law waves, although the behavior was different each time, they generally followed a certain rule. Only this time, the result of the eruption of the law wave was different from all the previous ones. This time, the law wave was even more intense, and the result was even more terrifying. At this moment, the origin of the countless laws that filled this entire space-time changed completely. The originally orderly flowing light directly collapsed and became incomparably chaotic. The space-time that was originally covered by the flowing light began to shake violently at this moment, as if some indescribable existence was stirring this space-time behind it. At this time, the auras released by the cultivators in the many nodes directly poured into the void and collided with the existence behind the void. It was unknown whether they were blocking that existence or trying their best to guide it. However, according to Luo Fan's thoughts, perhaps it was more of a guide. There's still a deeper layer. At this moment, a light appeared in Luo Fan's mind. Following this light, a bitter smile appeared on his face. However, he was also restricted by his habitual thinking. Although this was already the deepest part of the world of laws, no one would have thought that this was the deepest place. Who didn't have a deeper existence behind this space-time? Perhaps space-time was just the deepest layer of this world of laws, and space-time was uncertain. At this moment, he suddenly felt that something was amiss. Although the surrounding space-time was constantly turbulent, the turbulence was approaching from afar. The closer it was to the stone platform he was on, the more intense the turbulence was. The further away they were, the weaker the turbulence became. It was as if the platform had some inexplicable strengthening effect on the existence behind this space-time. Faced with such a situation, countless thoughts flashed through his mind. With these thoughts in mind, his figure flashed and sank into the stone platform. The stone platform itself was solid and looked more like a stone that existed in normal space-time. However, don't forget what kind of space-time this was. This was a space-time in the depths of the world of laws, a space-time that was formed from the interweaving of countless laws. Such a space-time was fundamentally different from normal space-time. How could a normal stone exist in such a space-time? This stone platform seemed to be made of stone, but in fact, it was just its appearance. Inside, there must be a more profound truth and more incredible mysteries than a stone. Over the years, Luo Fan had spent most of his time analyzing the endless laws around him. However, he didn't completely let go of the stone platform under his feet. In the process, he also thought of many ways to analyze this stone. Although he didn't dare to fully understand all the mysteries of this stone, he roughly knew some of its characteristics. Now that he knew these characteristics, it became possible to sink into it and enter the hidden place behind the stone platform. Especially at this time, when the existence behind the stone platform was particularly active, it was even more so. Soon, Luo Fan felt that he had already touched an invisible barrier, a strange barrier that was extremely turbulent and had millions of changes at every moment. The moment he touched this barrier, he felt an incredible shock in his body and mind. A slight numbness spread from the point of contact to his entire body. Even his spirit felt an indescribable impact at this moment. How strange! At this moment, Luo Fan felt an indescribable emotion in his heart. Although this impact was terrifying, it ultimately only made him feel uncomfortable. It didn't affect him at all. Immediately, his heart moved slightly. Without any movement, his light of earth had already penetrated his body and poured into the barrier. Crack! A formless roar reverberated through his mind in an instant. The entire strange space-time in the outside world was also inconceivably shaken at this moment. Countless cracks appeared everywhere in this space-time. Endless streams of light continuously seeped into the depths of these cracks. Along with these streams of light were the tremendous auras of the thousands of cultivators. Therein, excited roars emerged in the hearts of many cultivators at this moment. In order to enter the space-time behind this space-time, the thousands of cultivators had already worked hard tens of thousands of times. It could be said that every single one of them was almost numb. Under such circumstances, suddenly, so many cracks appeared out of nowhere in this barrier that they couldn't break through no matter how hard they tried. Now, they only needed to find the right place to break through. That kind of feeling was indescribable. Open for me. After the auras rushed in, they frantically expanded in all directions, trying their best to open the cracks they had chosen so that more of their consciousness could rush into the space-time behind the cracks. They wanted to find what they were looking for and the secrets of the space-time that might exist in this space-time. However, it was a pity that these cracks seemed to be in a different dimension from them. They could enter the space-time behind these cracks and see all sorts of things that they couldn't imagine behind the cracks. However, it was completely impossible to use these cracks, open them, and destroy them. No matter how much power they used, how many divine abilities they used, or even how much transcendence they had cultivated, all they got in the end was an empty feedback. Not to mention opening those cracks, they couldn't even touch those cracks at all. How could it be him? At this moment, many thoughts appeared in the minds of many cultivators. With this thought, the cracks completely closed, and the space-time that they could see had disappeared without a trace. At this moment, the entire space-time was still shaking. There was a feeling that something was approaching this space-time from behind, trying its best to break through the barrier of this space-time and truly enter this space-time. However, at this moment, many cultivators no longer had the intention to continue attacking and guiding that existence. One by one, they left their positions in an instant, and in the blink of an eye, they had all arrived at the node where Luo Fan was originally located. In just a short while, tens of thousands of figures appeared around the stone platform where Luo Fan was originally at. These figures had all sorts of strange appearances, and it was difficult to even find a humanoid silhouette. However, no matter what form they took, No matter how ugly they were according to ordinary people's aesthetics, they seemed so harmonious and orderly when they appeared on their bodies, and even had a certain charm of perfection. From this, it could be seen that the forms of these living beings were all perfect and even had the appearance of the Tao body of the land. This also meant that almost no two of these living beings came from the same land or perfect land. Almost all the cultivators came from different places. I definitely didn't remember wrongly. This is the place, one of the cultivators said. The cultivators were silent at this moment. None of them doubted whether this was the place they were looking for. If they were here by themselves, they might make a mistake. However, there were tens of thousands of cultivators here, and everyone thought that this was the place. So how could they make a mistake? This place doesn't look any different. Why was he able to break into it in such a short time? Some cultivators said in disbelief. Perhaps the node here is special. Another cultivator said. By the time he finished speaking, several figures had already appeared on the stone platform and started to descend towards it. Seeing this, the other cultivators seemed to have woken up from a dream. One by one, they rushed onto the stone platform and sank into the depths of the stone platform. No matter what, these cultivators had cultivated in this space-time for hundreds of millions of years. During such a long time, their understanding of the space-time and the stone platform had obviously reached an unbelievable level. Although the existence of the stone platform was completely unfamiliar to them, it was still a part of this space-time after all. In fact, although there were very few other nodes, they had seen similar existences. Under such circumstances, Luo Fan had to spend a lot of time comprehending to find a way to sink into the stone platform, but it was not a problem for them. Soon, more than half of the cultivators had completely sunk into the stone platform. The stone platform was not big, and if a dozen or 20 cultivators were to stand on it, it would probably fill up the entire stone platform. However, at this moment, the stone platform did not change at all, even though thousands of cultivators had sunk into the stone platform. It felt like this stone platform was still the same stone platform, and its appearance was still the same. However, it did not change at all. It was as if all the cultivators who had merged into the stone platform did not exist at all. Soon, strange rumbling sounds came from the depths of the stone platform. The stone platform began to shake violently. Then, chi-chi-chi-chi-chi. Soft sounds came from the stone platform, and one after another, figures flew out of the stone platform like heavy objects bouncing off a spring, splashing in all directions. It was as if a woman was scattering flowers. I know the reason now, a cultivator said, then turned around and left, disappearing from the eyes of many cultivators in the blink of an eye. Even though the other cultivators did not do this, their actions were quite similar. After stabilizing their bodies, they quickly flew away from this place at an unimaginable speed. In just a few short breaths of time, there were no longer any cultivators left on the platform. Then what did they find out? The cultivators who stayed behind were all confused. They simply did not know what was going on. Weren't those cultivators' actions too synchronized? After entering the stone platform, they left as if they had comprehended something. They wanted to stop some cultivators and ask them, but they knew that if they stopped them, it would be a grudge to the death. At this moment, they could only suppress the impulse in their hearts and choose to rush into the platform one by one to find the reason that the cultivators had found very soon. There were no longer any cultivators around the stone platform. All the cultivators left and entered the stone platform, returning the place to the emptiness before they had appeared. Boom, boom, boom. As those cultivators entered the stone platform shook even more intensely. The rumbling sounds that came from it became even louder and more shocking. Not long after, chi-chi-chi-chi-chi sounds came from the stone platform again. Following this, excited cultivators flew out of the stone platform one by one. After stabilizing themselves, they quickly turned around and left, disappearing into the distance in the blink of an eye. It was just like the cultivators from before. I've finally found a reason. I just hope they don't move so quickly. The cultivator who left last only left behind this sentence. NT. Chapter 2638. They were all able to see the barrier on the stone platform. It was a barrier that led to a deeper space-time, or rather, the barrier behind the countless cracks that they had discovered earlier. However, although the barrier was not very strong, they could not touch it no matter how hard they tried. Some sort of indescribable repulsive force was repelling them, no matter how hard they tried. Even if they used all sorts of divine abilities and powers, they could not change this fact. They could not even touch it, let alone break it and pass through the barrier. If it was an ordinary cultivator, they might have already been at their wits' end and could only retreat and think of another way. However, one must not forget that these cultivators had entered the world of laws through their own methods. Any one of their abilities in exploration, research, and deduction were not something other cultivators could compare to. In this situation, where they could not find a way to get in contact with the barrier, any one of them could think of a way to find out the source of this repulsive force. In the end, they used all sorts of inconceivable methods to quickly determine the source of the problem. The source was none other than the fact that a cultivator had already passed through this barrier. After understanding this, how could they not know what to do? Since the barrier could only withstand one cultivator's entry, they only needed to choose a similar place to enter if they wanted to enter. In this strange space-time, there are not many places that were similar to this stone platform. Not to mention the others, just the nodes that they were originally at were already similar places. It was because they understood this that they quickly chose to leave after entering the stone platform. They chose other places to find a way to enter the deepest part of the stone platform. Streams of light rushed to various places in this strange space-time. Not long after, they returned to their original positions and began to go deeper into the strange carrier that they were standing on. They wanted to touch the barrier and break through the barrier. However, less than 1 in 1,000 of them succeeded in the end. Only 8 cultivators actually passed through the barrier and entered the space-time behind it. The reason why these 8 cultivators succeeded and broke through the barrier was not just because they were powerful, but because they were fast enough and lucky enough. This was because the strange vibration that affected this strange space-time had a time limit. When the 8 cultivators broke through the barrier, the vibration still existed. However, by the time they broke through, the tremors had already disappeared without a trace. The entire strange space-time had completely returned to its normal state when the waves of laws had erupted. Returning to such a state, the strange barrier that appeared in the depths of the nodes naturally became invisible. He couldn't even sense it, let alone touch it or break through it. Damn it! Angry roars erupted from all the nodes. Seeing the opportunity that he had waited for billions of years being forcefully missed before his very eyes, it went without saying how painful this feeling was. At this moment, shockwaves, auras, and divine abilities burst forth from the various nodes. Some were venting towards the node, some were venting towards the surrounding space-time, and some were even venting towards the world of laws outside. Clearly, this change had caused many cultivators to lose their minds. It didn't matter how the failed cultivators vented their frustrations. At this moment, behind the crack, the 8 cultivators saw what they had been dreaming of, a scene that was completely different from the strange space and time. There seemed to be time and space here, and there seemed to be no time and space here. With a thought, endless space-time, endless worlds, and endless lands appeared before their eyes. With another thought, everything disappeared completely, turning into an endless, mysterious, and wondrous thing. It seemed to be a law, yet it also seemed to be something that could not be described with words or even understood at all. Here, they saw Luo Fan, who was the first to enter. At this moment, Luo Fan was hovering among the endless, strange existences. His body seemed to have turned into a huge mouth that was constantly swallowing the endless, strange existences around him. Vaguely, they could even see that Luo Fan was improving at an unimaginable speed. Originally, Luo Fan could already be on par with them just by relying on the strength that he could exert in this place. However, after watching for a while, they realized that he had actually surpassed them in just a few breaths' time. There are endless truths hidden in this. At this moment, the 8 cultivators came to a realization. At this moment, They didn't even look at each other. They had already separated and started to let go of themselves, frantically swallowing the endless, strange existences around them. As they inhaled and exhaled, they felt an endless amount of principles and mysteries that they had never been able to understand crazily pouring into their bodies. They quickly integrated into their minds, into their memories, and became resources for their growth. As expected, at this moment, the cultivator's heart was filled with excitement. If this continued, in less than 100 million years, they would be able to improve to their peak. In other words, they would be able to use another method to completely bypass the shackles of this place. Just as they were about to speak, a strange sound entered their ears. Immediately after, the endless strange existences around them seemed to be stirred even more vigorously and began to gather in a certain direction. This suddenly made it more difficult for them to swallow the strange existences. Someone has broken through. This was the thought in the minds of the cultivators. Then they all turned their gazes from all directions to the center, where Luo Fan was the first to step into this strange place. As expected, the amount of the strange existences that Luo Fan swallowed was many times greater than before. It felt as if his swallowing ability had suddenly skyrocketed by more than 100 times. How can he be so fast? At this moment, such a thought appeared in the minds of many cultivators. However, they had already figured out what was going on in an instant. It was clear that in such a short period of time, Luo Fan had already broken through a certain barrier and stepped into a realm that they couldn't reach even after spending countless years in that strange space-time. No, he was originally slightly weaker than us. So, he didn't just break through one realm, but 2 realms. The cultivators suddenly came to a realization, and their expressions changed greatly. In such a cultivation environment, it would even take them hundreds of millions of years to achieve a breakthrough. However, this person had entered this place before them and obtained 2 breakthroughs in less than 2 hours. How could they not be shocked by such a great disparity? Suddenly, a cultivator murmured, "It is said that some cultivators walk the path of the opposite direction, the path of reverse." The other cultivators' bodies trembled, and their faces were filled with shock. They knew very well what the path of the opposite direction was. The normal way of cultivation was to continuously deepen one's understanding of the earth, all things space-time, rules, dharma, great Tao, and even chaos. From these, one could gradually extract the concepts that were suitable for oneself, such as things, phenomena, and even everything else. After that, one would constantly refine new concepts and combine them with the old ones until the entire worldview was established. In this way, one could naturally obtain the worldview of the true sage level when one cultivated to the end, allowing one to surpass everything and obtain the ability to live freely in the state of chaos. In the end, one would obtain the essence of eternity and immortality. This was the normal way of cultivation. Although this way of cultivation was slow, there were no disasters or tribulations. After accumulating for an infinite amount of time, it seemed that one would eventually be able to achieve transcendence and become a true sage. However, in the infinite land in the state of chaos, due to the will of a true sage, there were some who walked on a completely different path. This kind of path was not about condensing concepts one by one and then building them up bit by bit until it became a perfect worldview. Instead, one had to establish a complete worldview from the beginning and then improve it over and over again until it finally reached the level of a perfect worldview of the true sage level. Through this method, one would finally obtain a perfect worldview and finally become a true sage. This was the path of the opposite direction. Compared to the normal way of cultivation, the path of the opposite direction had an advantage, which was that it was fast. Walking the path of the opposite direction did not require an infinite amount of time to obtain the perfect worldview of the true sage level. This was because the worldview was complete from the beginning. Therefore, as long as one continued to improve this worldview, absorbing nutrients from the outside world, and absorbing various principles and mysteries, one would eventually be able to raise this worldview to the level of a perfect worldview of the true sage level within a limited period of time. From this point of view, the path of going against the flow had a huge advantage compared to the normal path of cultivation that was going in the direction of the flow. However, why was it that even with such a huge advantage, there were very few people who chose this path perfectly? The reason was that if one walked the path of the opposite direction, they would encounter tribulations, one tribulation after another. Each tribulation stronger than the previous one was enough to completely obliterate all the cultivators who walked the path of the opposite direction. According to the information that the 8 cultivators in this strange place had heard, the state of chaos was endless. There were billions and trillions of worlds in it, and there were even more perfect worlds. However, in the history of those lands, there had never been a single cultivator who had walked the path of going against the flow of time. All the cultivators who chose to walk the path of the opposite direction, as far as they knew, had died in the tribulations that they had encountered time and time again. Of course, these cultivators still harbored some doubts about this. After all, they did not dare to be sure that what they knew was everything. Perhaps there were some exceptions outside of what they knew. However, it was clear that regardless of whether there were exceptions or not, for any cultivator who knew the difficulty of the path of the opposite direction, they would obviously not choose this path that they knew was almost certain death. The 8 cultivators in front of them were the same. Is there really someone who is so crazy to choose this path and to take this step? Another cultivator murmured with a face full of disbelief. How difficult and dangerous was the path of the opposite direction. Even if they were absolute geniuses in the places where they were born, and even if each of them was a rare cultivation genius that only appeared once in a trillion years, they still did not dare to choose this path. How crazy must one be to choose this path? With such a fast growth rate, no matter how I think about it, it can only be the path of the opposite direction. Another cultivator sighed and made the final conclusion. Everyone knew the dangers of the path of the opposite direction, and everyone knew the power of the path of the opposite direction. If an ordinary person saw the changes that had happened to Luo Fan, it would be difficult for them to associate it with the path of the opposite direction. This was because the more they knew, the more they understood the dangers and horror of the path of the opposite direction. With the cognitive ability of ordinary cultivators, they would instinctively eliminate this possibility, and then use their shallow knowledge to think about the explanation for the situation of Luo Fan's body. However, it was obvious that none of the 8 cultivators here seemed to be ordinary cultivators. They had enough of the possibilities that they had eliminated were all the possibilities that could possibly be close to this speed of improvement. And after eliminating all the possibilities, in the end, the only one that was left was obviously this seemingly impossible possibility. As for why someone would choose to do such an impossible thing, they would not be confused. Who knew what the other party was thinking with their vast experience and knowledge? People who deliberately chose to do something even though they knew it was impossible existed in almost every world and every space and time. It was actually not surprising that Luo Fan was such a person. At this moment, a cultivator said with a somewhat inexplicable expression, "I wonder how many tribulations he has passed." These words aroused the curiosity of many cultivators. Going against the flow of time was a path that could not be taken. In the past, ordinary cultivators would not be able to cultivate to the point where they were qualified to step into this place. Even if they cultivated to the level that they could display in this place, they would not be able to find one in a trillion people. Now, there is actually someone who had the right to step into this place and easily crush them. How could they not be curious? Chapter 2639. Luo Fan was naturally not in the mood to pay attention to the thoughts of the 8 cultivators. At this moment, his mind was already occupied by the principles and mysteries of the source of the heat law that were constantly being released from his body. That's right. What he cared about at this moment was not the wonderful existence that was crazily surging into his body from the outside, but the countless principles and mysteries that were continuously surging out from the depths of the source of the heat law that he had fused with. The reason for this was actually very simple. It was because the nature of the countless wonderful existences that were crazily surging in from the outside was just some kind of invisible and mysterious force that was specially used to stimulate the source of the heat law in his body. Of course, this was only so for him. For other cultivators and existences that cultivated other cultivation paths, the effect would obviously not be like this. Instead, it would transform into something that was the most beneficial to them. In other words, the reason why this wonderful existence would display such a characteristic was not because it was born with this characteristic, but because Luo Fan needed this characteristic. One could imagine how mysterious it was. In this kind of change, the limit that Luo Fan originally felt that he would encounter if he did not walk his own cultivation path seemed to not exist at all. It was easily pierced through, allowing the strength that he could exert to continuously rise at an unimaginable speed. At this moment, in just a short period of time, the strength that he could exert had already surpassed the level of a third tribulation powerhouse and directly stepped into the level of a fourth tribulation powerhouse. The entire process was so smooth that it was as easy as breathing. The reason for this was not really because there was really some kind of power that eliminated his limit. Instead, it was because there were simply too many principles and mysteries that were surging out from the source of the heat law. In the past, Luo Fan thought that no matter how many principles and mysteries there were, they would not have any effect on breaking the limit. However, the facts prove that he was wrong. After the quantity of these principles and mysteries increased to a certain level, it actually produced an unbelievable qualitative change. In the end, the limit that ordinary principles and mysteries could not produce at all was easily broken through. Of course, this was only the result of the endless principles and mysteries taking effect at all times. When the amount of these principles and mysteries decreased or even stopped, he would once again encounter that limit. Of course, that limit wouldn't stop him from reaching that realm like before. Instead, it would stop him at that realm of principles and mysteries. The process of ascension was so wonderful that he almost forgot everything about the outside world. By the time he came back to his senses, the strength he could exert had already stopped at the level of a fifth tribulation expert. At this moment, the mysterious existences that were rushing in from the outside had completely disappeared. Because it had completely disappeared, the countless principles and mysteries that were constantly surging out from the source of the heat laws in his body had also become extremely slow. This kind of slow release was clearly no longer able to affect his limits. This caused his strength to stop increasing. This also caused him to once again encounter that limit, a limit that had already been changed to the level of a fifth tribulation expert. It's a pity that I can't reach the peak. Luo Fan sighed to himself. Looking around, the surroundings had already turned into a boundless void. Even space and time didn't exist in this void. In this void, only 8 cultivators in the distance were looking at him with inexplicable, complicated gazes. Looking at these cultivators, Luo Fan only smiled faintly and said, "I was focused on cultivation just now and forgot about you fellow Taoists. Please forgive me." The 8 cultivators could only smile bitterly at this moment. One of the cultivators said helplessly, "Are all those who go against the flow as rebellious as you? The 8 of us had the chance to snatch the opportunity from you, but we actually couldn't resist at all. The opportunity we obtained was not even 1/10,000th of what you obtained." Luo Fan only smiled faintly and said, "It's only because you guys came late. If you guys came before me, perhaps you guys would have obtained the greatest benefits." The cultivators could only shake their heads and sigh. They could naturally tell that Luo Fan's words were just giving them a way out. In reality, even if they came with Luo Fan first, their gains wouldn't be much better than what they obtain now. The difference between the righteous path and the retrograde path was ultimately too great. This was also something they truly understood after seeing the terrifying speed at which Luo Fan absorbed the mysterious existence. "Fellow Taoist, since you came here first, do you know where the treasure is?" Another cultivator asked. Hearing this, Luo Fan couldn't help but laugh. "Fellow Taoist, you're laughing. If I knew about the treasure, I would have taken it long ago. Why would I wait for you guys to ask? The cultivator wasn't embarrassed. His question was just a casual one, and he didn't have much hope of getting the answer. Then what do you think about the opportunity just now? Is it the biggest opportunity in this place? Another cultivator asked. Luo Fan shook his head and said, I only entered this place before you guys, so my understanding of this place might not be as good as yours. If you guys don't know, then I don't know either. Saying this, he turned to look at the 8 cultivators and suddenly said, I noticed that you guys seem to have some extra auras. It seems that you guys have gained a lot these days. I just found some leftovers that you didn't want. It's not worth mentioning. Not worth mentioning. The cultivators just laughed and waved their hands. As they spoke, they all raised their vigilance and were ready to deal with Luo Fan's possible attack at any time. Facing their vigilance, Luo Fan only sensed it in his heart and didn't take it to heart. He naturally knew that these cultivators were worried that he would attack them and rob them of their fortuitous encounters. However, they didn't know that Luo Fan wasn't interested in their opportunity at all. At this moment, to him, the biggest opportunity in this world was the source of laws that were everywhere. Even though he seemed to have reached his limit, and the source of laws couldn't continue to increase his strength in this place. However, the source of laws could really increase his cultivation level. As long as he continued to stay here, his true cultivation level would continue to increase until 300 million years later, when his 7th Great Tribulation would descend in this way. The most attractive thing to him in this world of laws was the final treasure. Apart from the rare treasure, any other opportunities were just icing on the cake for him. He was naturally happy to have it. Even if he didn't think it was a loss. Therefore, the opportunities obtained by these cultivators might be very important to them, but to him, it was nothing more than that. Day by day, at this moment, his surroundings trembled slightly. It was as if some mysterious existence appeared from nothingness and started to sweep through the void. Gradually, the surroundings returned to its original mysterious state. Again, Luo Fan was delighted to see this. He activated the heat rule source in his body, wanting to absorb the countless mysterious and wonderful existences that had just appeared in his surroundings. However, something that he couldn't accept happened. Although these mysterious existences were absorbed into his body, they couldn't be used for their original purposes. They came out the same way they went in. He couldn't control or restrict them at all. What's going on? Luo Fan frowned. He tried for dozens of breaths and experimented thousands or tens of thousands of times. In the end, he realized that no matter how hard he tried, no matter what angle or method he used to absorb the mysterious existence outside into his body, the mysterious existence could no longer resonate with the source of laws of heat in his body. He couldn't let the source of laws of heat continue to release the principles and mysteries hidden within it. Only one chance? Luo Fan sighed after a long time and stopped his futile efforts. He turned to look at the remaining 8 cultivators. He realized that the 8 cultivators were in a similar state as him. All of them looked like they had lost their parents. A few of them were still holding on, but the rest had already given up on absorbing the mysterious existence around them. The few that were still holding on did not last long either. They gave up completely after a while. As they gave up one by one, the way they looked at Luo Fan changed slightly. Vaguely, there was an inexplicable resentment in their eyes. Evidently, they understood how precious the opportunity they had fought over with Luo Fan was. Apart from this resentment, they were also filled with intense remorse. After all, if they had known that there was only one chance to absorb the mysterious existence in the outside world and turn it into resources for their own growth, they would not have given up on fighting with Luo Fan so easily. Given their methods, they might not have been able to win against Luo Fan even if they used all their strength. However, it was not a problem for them to obtain more benefit from this fight, so that the things they fought for together would not be less than 1/10,000th of what Luo Fan had. However, they did not think that this was a rare opportunity. They thought that even if these existences were absorbed by Luo Fan, they would be able to find a chance to make up for it in the future. This was why they gave up after realizing that they could not win against Luo Fan. Instead, they began to wonder how long and how much Luo-Fan could absorb. If they had known that this would happen, they would have continued fighting even if they had to pay the price of losing their vitality. Unfortunately, a missed opportunity was a missed opportunity. No matter how regretful and resentful they could not change the fact that they had given up on this opportunity. At this moment, they could only slowly withdraw their gazes and suppress the resentment in their hearts. The opportunity that they had missed was gone. They had to continue to survive and cultivate. They clearly knew that the strength that Luo-Fan could display surpassed all of them, and even their combined strength, but they still continued to provoke him. They were simply courting death. How could rational cultivators like them do something like that? Luo-Fan naturally sensed the changes in their gazes. If these cultivators did not restrain themselves and suppress their resentment, he would have definitely suppressed them. After all, it was unacceptable for him to allow an existence that harbored ill intentions against him to go unpunished. Now that these cultivators had given up on their resentment and controlled their emotions, it was a good thing for him. Everyone has made a wise decision, Luo-Fan said to these cultivators. The cultivators smiled bitterly. They knew that the change in their state of mind had been seen by Ouyang-Ming, and they could not help but heave sighs of relief. Fortunately, they had made the right decision. Otherwise, the results of their hundreds of millions of years of hard work would have gone up in smoke. Luo-Fan did not wait for their reply. He focused his attention on the mysterious existences around him. These mysterious existences clearly did not just have the effect of assisting in cultivation. Just the fact that they could be reborn after being lost and could change according to the cultivator's cultivation was enough to show that they had more profound and mysterious uses. At this moment, as Luo-Fan's thoughts changed, the mysterious existences in his eyes gradually changed. Not long after, they turned into a huge mirror. It was a mysterious, huge mirror that could reflect endless things. The light and shadow within it were constantly changing. At this moment, the mirror showed all kinds of subtle light and shadow, as if it was reflecting a strange space. In this space, there seemed to be countless mysterious lines constantly changing. During the process of changing, it seemed to faintly conform to some kind of principle and mystery that Luo-Fan was comprehending. The 8 cultivators could not see this mirror at all. In their eyes, after Luo-Fan said that sentence, his figure had already disappeared into that mysterious existence. It was as if he had been covered by that mysterious existence, but also seemed to have merged with it. It was as if he had completely left this place. A cultivator sighed and said, "I can't understand it at all." His words were met with agreement from the other cultivators. Luo-Fan's personality and what he was doing were different from what they knew of ordinary cultivators in the past. In conclusion, they could not understand it at all. However, perhaps this proves that there are even more profound mysteries here. Perhaps our opportunity hasn't been completely lost. Another cultivator said, Chapter 2640. In the world of laws, for the first time in hundreds of millions of years, the tide of laws that had been in a state of eruption disappeared before it could travel through the entire world of laws, and before all the cultivators in the world of laws could feel the greatness of the tide of laws. This abnormal change shocked all the cultivators in the world of laws. After all, the stability of the world of laws had been recognized by them after hundreds of millions of years of observation. In the past, even if there was a great war between cultivators that affected the entire world of laws, the world of laws would not be affected at all. The waves of laws would appear and disappear as they should, completely ignoring everything that the cultivators in the world of laws did. However, at this moment, a change that had not occurred for hundreds of millions of years occurred. For the first time, the waves of laws calmed down at a time that should not have been calmed. This situation represented far too many things to the cultivators present. In an instant, almost all the cultivators left their original cultivation grounds and rushed out of their cave abodes. They hovered in midair and began to observe the entire world, wanting to know what exactly was happening in this world. The cultivators rushed up one after another and hovered in midair. This made the entire world look completely different from before. Back then, the world of laws had appeared like a public cultivation ground. That said, there were countless auras of cultivators there. Although there were countless cultivators' auras here, because they were all hidden, the place seemed relatively peaceful. However, the situation now was completely different. The cultivators left their cave abodes one by one and hovered in midair, staring at everything in all directions as if they were going to pounce on something at any time. This made the world seem like a battlefield that could erupt at any time. Who is it? What do they find? What do they trigger? These three questions echoed in the minds of the cultivators, causing their expressions to become extremely solemn. Although they had always been cultivating with the help of the endless sources of laws in the world of laws, they did not forget what they were looking for when they stepped into this world. They did not forget that the greatest secret and the greatest benefit of this world was the supreme treasure that could allow them to experience the true sage realm. Under such circumstances, as soon as they saw this change that involved the operation of the entire world, the first thing that came to their minds was that someone had found the treasure, or at least there were clues about it. A place with cultivators won't be the place where the changes will take place. Some of the cultivators who were relatively sharper were the first to come to this conclusion. Every cultivator was confident that they would not fall into a disadvantageous position when compared to other cultivators. However, every cultivator knew their own limits. He knew that he might not necessarily be stronger than any other cultivator in this world of laws. With this kind of self-awareness, they naturally understood that it was almost impossible for other cultivators to find what they couldn't find even after spending a lot of effort. Similarly, there was a high chance that he could find something that others couldn't. With this reasoning, they naturally understood that the places where cultivators already existed were clearly places that were treated as strongholds by those cultivators. Those cultivators themselves could not find any abnormalities. That's right. It's almost impossible for me to find any abnormalities after I go there. After understanding this, they immediately eliminated most of the areas. After some thought, the cultivators all had their own targets. Their targets were none other than the areas where there were no cultivators at all. In the past, these areas actually existed as well. Just like now, no cultivators chose to settle down there. However, in the past, these cultivators didn't even have time to cultivate. After exploring those areas once and finding nothing special, they naturally let them go. Naturally, they could not spend too much effort on them. But now, the situation was completely different. This was because in their hearts, the source of the changes in this world was the areas that were previously unexplored by cultivators. How could they not spend effort to explore them? How could it be like before, directly passing through these areas in a flash? Many cultivators gathered in different areas and began to investigate these areas from the inside to the outside, from the deepest part to the outermost layer, trying their best to analyze all the mysteries in these areas. This world of laws was so vast. After most of the areas were eliminated, the areas waiting for cultivators to explore were still extremely vast. It was so vast that ordinary cultivators would completely give up on exploring after seeing it. However, it was obvious that the cultivators who could enter this world of laws, even if they entered with the help of an invitation letter, were definitely not ordinary cultivators. Their determination and persistence allowed them to face such a vast project without any hesitation. None of them complained as they immersed themselves in this kind of exploration. In fact, each of them was more proactive than the last. In the past, everyone knew how many cultivators there were in this world of laws. However, no one really calculated the specific number. Their understanding of the number of cultivators was also limited to a rough understanding. And now, because most of the cultivators had left their cultivation grounds and gathered in those regions to explore the abnormalities in those regions, the cultivators in this world finally realized just how many of their kind there were. It was actually a terrifying number that could be calculated in the trillions. There was a high number of cultivators exploring the place. Every one of them had their own specialties and specializations. Naturally, there were also many abilities that conflicted with each other. In this way, during the exploration process, conflicts between the cultivators were naturally inevitable. However, there was a good thing about this world for cultivators, and that was that their essence was far more powerful than the strength that they could unleash. Under such circumstances, conflicts between cultivators were meaningless to them. After all, the strength that they could unleash was so weak that even if the other party stood still and allowed themselves to be attacked, one could not really kill the other party. At most, one could only make the other party believe that the other party was dead and impose a death penalty. Such a punishment might be very severe and difficult to resist for the cultivators outside the world of laws. However, for existences that had entered the world of laws, it was just a small matter. With an endless source of laws, what was so difficult about choosing a new source of laws to cultivate and obtain other extraordinary abilities? On the contrary, killing the other party would only infuriate the other party. There were not many benefits and a lot of disadvantages. Why would the cultivators make such a choice? Therefore, the conflicts soon subsided. After the conflicts subsided, the cultivators naturally communicated more with each other due to the increase in contact. Cultivators' exploration methods would naturally be in conflict with each other. Naturally, there would be complementary methods. As the number of cultivators increased, the number of competitors increased. Some of the less confident cultivators began to form alliances and work together to explore the areas that might contain abnormalities. As the first group of cultivators began to form alliances, the other cultivators who initially did not plan to form alliances also began to form alliances. After all, the others had already formed alliances. If one did not form an alliance, how could one fight against the cultivators who formed alliances? How could one fight against the other party for opportunities? In this way, in the process of this investigation, the alliances kept merging and disintegrating, forming a state of chaos and order. The entire world almost fell into a state of war between feudal lords, dividing up the world. Initially, the cultivators who formed alliances only wanted to investigate the source of the abnormalities in the world of laws. However, as the alliance grew longer, they gradually realized that they could do more. For example, they could occupy certain areas and clear them out. Then, they would be able to search carefully without worrying that others would be the first to explore. With so many cultivators, as long as there was a possibility of such an idea appearing, it would definitely appear. Very soon, a war caused by the abnormalities in the world of laws broke out in this world. The huge number of cultivators formed alliances one after another and fought fiercely in this world according to their camps. In such battles, the efficiency of their exploration of abnormalities began to decrease. The war lasted for 100 years. After 100 years, the territories of the alliances gradually stabilized. When no one could suppress the other, the cultivators had no choice but to stop and continue the exploration mission that had been interrupted for 100 years. As for why they could keep fighting for such a long time without worrying about the abnormalities passing, it was because they did not encounter any rule waves in the past 100 years. The rule waves that would erupt every few decades, or at most every few years, did not appear even once in the past 100 years. It was as if there were no such thing as rule waves in this world. In such a situation, even ordinary creatures would understand that the abnormalities that caused such changes did not stop because of the passage of time. It was still going on somewhere in this world. Faced with such a situation, it could not be more normal for these cultivators to make such a choice. Because of this war that lasted for 100 years, the entire scene in the world of laws had changed a lot. The cultivators that were originally scattered all over the world, as if they were evenly scattered in the entire world, had been divided into tens of thousands of camps, occupying different directions in the world of laws. They were all powerhouses who had at least passed the sixth tribulation. The strength of their potential when they gathered together was self-evident. Now, the speed at which they could detect anomalies was more than 10,000 times faster than when they had split up and all of them had searched separately. Large areas of strange brilliance shrouded the area, and the situation in a large area was clearly investigated. Because many camps had stabilized their territories, If these camps did not want to start a new war, they could only shrink the direction of their exploration to their own territories. Thus, for a time, the countless cultivators from the various camps released all sorts of probing methods. But all of them were limited to their own territories and had nothing to do with the other territories. As for what they were thinking during this exploration, there was no need to guess at all. It was bound to be a direction that they would start exploring and breaking into after they finished exploring their own territory. This world was really too vast. In such a vast world, no cultivator was confident that their luck was so good that the area they chose was the source of the abnormality. It was precisely because of this understanding that they were prepared to return empty-handed after exploring their territories. However, the facts showed that reality was often more wonderful than imagination. One after another, the alliances discovered the source of the abnormality. Or perhaps they had discovered a secret hidden in this world of laws that they had not discovered before. It was not just one alliance, but almost every alliance had a similar discovery. A passageway hidden right under our noses. No, it's countless passageways hidden right under our noses. After the cultivators roughly sorted out their gains, they felt an indescribable sense of grievance surging from the bottom of their hearts. They could not control their auras as perfectly as before. Along with this change, countless terrifying auras surged through the entire world like hurricanes, sweeping through every corner of the world. It was as if the end of the world had arrived in this world of laws. At this moment, the countless sources of laws in the entire world seemed to show signs of activity, vaguely revealing their true appearance to the cultivators who had used the invitation to enter this world of laws. Chapter 26:41. With the cooperation of the various alliances, the cultivators' investigation abilities had finally improved to a higher level, allowing them to break through the limits of accepting invitations and see the secrets hidden right under their noses. Of course, the most important reason was that the world had undergone a change, causing the strange space-time hidden behind the nodes to no longer be as well hidden as before. All sorts of traces were revealed, allowing them to discover the existence of the space-time so easily. In the face of such a situation, the cultivators were as sullen as they could be. Under normal circumstances, even if the cultivators discovered the existence of the other space-time, they would not be able to observe it. Even if they entered through some means, they could only see the ordinary depths of the source of the laws. However, it was clear that this was not the normal situation. At this moment, the entire world of laws and even the waves of laws had disappeared. So how could the situation inside the nodes still be normal? But now, the space that the nodes pointed to had completely removed the restrictions on the cultivators. Any cultivator, regardless of whether they entered this world of laws through an invitation letter or through their own means, will be able to see the truth of this strange space-time. With a gentle breeze, more than 90% of the cultivators in the entire world disappeared without a trace. It was as if they did not exist at all. These cultivators didn't care about anything else. They directly used various methods to charge into the nodes and stepped into the mysterious space-time. What's going on? The cultivators in this space-time were completely dumbfounded. It must be known that in the past hundreds of millions of years, the frequency of the appearance of newcomers was only close to 10,000 years. Most of the time, there was not a single newcomer for millions or even tens of millions of years. However, at this moment, the number of newcomers increased by millions in the blink of an eye. In just a few breaths of time, trillions of cultivators had stepped into this space-time. Although this space-time was vast, it was really nothing compared to the world of laws in the outside world. Suddenly, there was an additional 1 trillion living beings. In an instant, the entire world became a little crowded. So you guys were hiding here. I thought you guys had left this place long ago. Some of the cultivators who were acquainted with the cultivators in this space-time realized that they would never be able to see the figure that they thought they would never see again. They couldn't help but feel enlightened and asked the cultivator they knew. Naturally, there was nothing good about that cultivator. Although he could use the rule that everyone agreed upon to prevent him from telling the other party about this world, what meaning would that have? None of the existences that could come to this place to fight for the opportunity were fools, who couldn't see the truth with a single glance. What was the point of such a forceful explanation? As the ones who came first, do you have any clues? The cultivator clearly wasn't here to listen to the other party's answer, but to gather information. At this time, he asked his own question. Although he entered first, the treasure was hidden too deeply, so he didn't gain much. The person who was asked shook his head and sighed. The newcomer didn't ask much about the minuscule harvest. This wasn't the way to get information. After hearing the other party's words, he only sighed and exchanged some pleasantries before leaving to continue participating in the activities of the alliance that he joined. When they broke through and entered this world, the alliance became extremely chaotic. All the cultivators only acted according to their own interests and fought to be the first to enter this space-time. However, when they really stepped into the space-time and discovered that there was a powerful forerunner in this space-time, they clearly understood that only by sticking together would they have a higher chance of finding clues to the existence of the rare treasure in this space-time. Just like how they discovered the existence of this space-time through the Alliance's complementary methods, the facts proved that their thoughts were correct. Very soon, the route to the next level was discovered by the various alliances. However, compared to entering the space-time, the difficulty of entering the next level skyrocketed by who knows how many times. Even though they discovered that the nodes were hidden in the depths of that special thing that separated them from the deeper secrets, they couldn't break that barrier and enter the next level of the secret. It was as if they didn't have the qualifications to enter at all. Obviously, not a single cultivator agreed with this situation. The cultivators who could enter this place were all unwilling to be ordinary and didn't think that they would be ordinary existences. Under such circumstances, how is it possible for them to admit that there was a place that they didn't have the qualifications to enter? Furthermore, that place was very likely to contain this world's greatest secret and most precious treasure. To them, the barrier didn't reject them because they weren't suitable, but because they hadn't found a suitable method yet. The pioneers struggled for several days before taking the initiative to put down their identities and began to join the various alliances, helping them find a way to enter the deeper levels of the secret. The strength that the cultivator alliances displayed had clearly made them admit that they couldn't break that barrier by themselves and enter the secret behind it. Of course, these cultivators could only set their goals on the various alliances. The various alliances naturally welcomed them with open arms. Although they were unhappy that they monopolized this space-time, these cultivators also knew that if they were in their shoes, they would definitely do the same, so there was nothing to criticize. Moreover, more importantly, criticizing them wouldn't bring them enough benefits. They would only make more enemies. On the contrary, accepting them, borrowing their experience, and avoiding detours through them was obviously enough to greatly increase the possibility of them entering the secret place. The benefits were self-evident. Bearing grudges would only lead to enmity, but accepting would bring benefits. Even ordinary people knew how to choose, let alone these powerful and intelligent cultivators. With the addition of those who had arrived earlier, the efficiency of the various alliances had greatly increased. Although there was still no way to easily open that barrier and allow the alliances to cross it one by one and enter the secret place, at least they had studied some of the rules of the barrier's changes and saw the possibility of crossing it. While the strange space-time was undergoing great changes, in the secret place below, Luo Fan had already found what he wanted to find. He immediately dispersed the mirror that he had formed through the miraculous existence. In a flash, he had already arrived at a certain place in this secret location and saw a door. It was an extremely obscure door that he wouldn't have noticed if he hadn't observed it through the mirror. There was no problem with the door being insignificant. If it was a normal living being, as long as it was larger than a molecule, it would be difficult for it to enter. However, it was obvious that such a door was big enough for Luo Fan. In fact, even if the door shrank by more than 10,000 times, it wouldn't obstruct him at all, and he would still be able to pass through it. What a mysterious door. Let me see where it leads to. The reason why this door attracted his attention was that the mysterious existence inside was denser than in other places. In fact, he vaguely felt that the mysterious existence was surging out from that door. With a change of heart, Luo Fan had already stepped into that door. In the instant that he stepped through the door trembled slightly and disappeared without a trace like a bubble. At this point, no one could trace Luo Fan's existence through that door anymore. At this moment, Luo Fan had already entered an extremely mysterious place. This place was so mysterious that it surpassed everything he had experienced before. Regardless of whether it was the mysterious existence from before, the strange space-time outside, or even the world of laws outside, they all seemed very ordinary compared to the place he was currently in. This place was not space-time, nor was it a world, nor was it a land. There was only one thing in this place, a human figure. The figure was sitting cross-legged not far in front of him. No, it was not far. This was not space-time, nor was it a world, nor was it a land, but there was no concept of spatial distance. It was not far, but it was more like the strength of some kind of connection. This was because it had some kind of subtle connection with Luo Fan, and this connection was not strong nor weak. It was located at a boundary between far and near, which gave Luo Fan the feeling that it was not far away. Luo Fan could not see the figure's face, height, weight, or even clothes at all. Or perhaps he could not remember it at all. It felt like everything about the figure was extremely clear. At the moment he saw it, he was even confident that he could use his memory to describe it completely and make it as clear and realistic as a photograph. However, in the next moment, when he shifted his gaze, he realized that all his impressions and memories of the figure had disappeared without a trace. All the traces that the figure had left in his heart could be summed up in a few words. It was a figure in the shape of a human. Or, it was a figure of a predecessor Taoist physique that he knew. The means of a true sage. At this moment, Luo Fan finally understood what was going on. As he understood, he could not help but feel a little disappointed. The power of a true sage did not mean much to him. Not to mention power, even the shadow of a true sage and the remarkable power of a true sage were the same to him. This was because, no matter what kind of power it was, he had actually seen it before. Moreover, back then, he had forcefully used the blade of wisdom to cut off all the memories of seeing all kinds of things related to a true sage. This was because, back then, those were more of a burden to him. Memorizing it would only bring him harm and not much benefit. After that, after cutting off all the memories, his cultivation began to go on an extremely smooth and fast track. Until now, the reason why he was able to improve to this stage was actually because he had waved the blade of wisdom to cut off all the memories back then. Now, although he was tens of thousands of times stronger than when he was only at the Supreme Emperor stage. However, compared to the techniques of a true sage, he was still not qualified. Under such circumstances, the figure in front of him was obviously related to a true sage. What was the point of him coming here? No matter how many things he comprehended from the true sage and how many principles and mysteries he had memorized, he could only cut off all the memories in the future. You seem to be very disappointed. At this moment, the figure spoke. This voice was extremely mysterious and seemed to contain endless principles and mysteries. Even the ups and downs of the tone seemed to be enough for Luo Fan to use hundreds of millions of years to comprehend. This voice was obviously the voice of a true sage. In Luo Fan's understanding, only a true sage could speak such mysterious words. To me, the power of a true sage is only a burden. If this is the last opportunity, I will naturally be very disappointed. Luo Fan immediately sighed. This was his true thought. Although it seemed to be somewhat offensive, he did not have any thoughts of concealing it. Of course, if the person in front of him was really related to a true sage, then there was no point in concealing it. If the person was related to a true sage, how could he not see through his thoughts? I see. I'm relieved that you can think this way. At this moment, the figure spoke again, and this sentence was completely incomprehensible to Luo Fan. Although the words that the other party used were still the same as before and contained endless principles and mysteries, it contained mysteries that were enough for any existence below a true sage to be unable to comprehend even after hundreds of millions of years. However, this was not the reason that Luo Fan could not understand. What do you mean? He was stunned and could not help but ask. Chapter 2642. All of a sudden, the figure raised his hand and extended it toward Luo Fan. Although he wasn't too far away from Luo Fan, he wasn't so close that he could touch him with his hand. Moreover, there wasn't even space-time in this strange place, let alone being able to touch him with one's hand. However, under such circumstances, the palm seemed to have penetrated endless space-time and arrived in front of Luo Fan. It was about to envelop him. At this moment, Luo Fan felt that the palm in front of him began to enlarge infinitely. His own thoughts, his own will, and everything else seemed to have been slowed down infinitely. Even though he clearly saw that the other party's palm had already arrived in front of him, he couldn't make the correct response at all. He could only watch as the palm came down on him like a piece of land. By the time Luo Fan came back to his senses, he realized that he was already in a place of chaos. Looking at the grayish, bizarre existence that filled his field of vision, Luo Fan suddenly came to a realization. This is the state of chaos. However, although he understood it, he still couldn't understand why the state of chaos in front of him would become like this. After all, it wasn't that he hadn't seen the state of chaos before. In fact, he even had clones that were sent into the state of chaos to personally experience how extraordinary and terrifying the state of chaos was. But now, the existence that seemed to be in the state of chaos in front of him had actually become something like a background in his eyes. It was like a canvas that was waiting for him to paint something on it. With a thought, Luo Fan followed his will and began to paint on the canvas in front of him. A piece of land was directly born in front of him. It was something that he was extremely familiar with. The Earth universe. It wasn't the Earth universe of the past, but the Earth universe that he understood before he transmigrated. It was the Earth universe that was made up of endless stars. The process was extremely easy. Even when his strength wasn't shackled and he could perfectly unleash his power, it wasn't as easy as it was now when he opened up such a universe. It was as if smearing on the chaotic state before him did not require any effort at all. In fact, he did not even need to expend a single bit of effort. However, before Luo Fan could sigh with emotion, the Earth universe in front of him had gradually melted away. In the blink of an eye, it had disappeared without a trace. How is this possible? This was the only thought in Luo Fan's mind at this moment. Although the Earth universe that he condensed was not the real Earth universe, based on his understanding of the perfect land and the Earth, it should at least be of the perfect land level. And the perfect land was obviously enough to exist in the state of chaos for a long time. Even if they took 10,000 steps back and this Earth universe was somewhat lacking compared to perfection, it would not be too much. It would not be to the extent where it could exist in a state of chaos for a long time to the point where it could not even maintain a breath. The moment this doubt appeared in his mind, the answer to the question instantly appeared in his heart. It was as if he already knew the answer, but he did not think of it because it was deeply hidden in his mind. This is because the worldview of the Earth universe is not pure. As he got this answer, he instantly understood what kind of state he was in. It was just like when he got the answer that the Earth universe could not stay in the state of chaos for too long. He just needed to dig a little in his heart, and the answer emerged on its own. What he was currently in was a sliver of the perspective of a true sage. From this, he could also know that the figure he encountered before was not the figure of a true sage, but the figure of that rare treasure. At the very least, it should be a trace of the projection of that rare treasure. Only in this way could it give Luo Fan a trace of the perspective of a true sage. As for why the figure of that rare treasure was in the form of the predecessor Taoist body, it was even simpler. It was a powerful, rare treasure that could give others the perspective of a true sage and even allow cultivators to comprehend the true sage realm. What was so surprising about a change in form? As for why he was sure that it was a changed form and not its real form, it was even simpler. This piece of land was created by the joint efforts of countless true sages in the land. Every piece of land had its own unique form of the predecessor Taoist body. The form of the predecessor Taoist body that Luo Fan knew was only one of the insignificant forms. Under such circumstances, the form of the greatest opportunity that was prepared by many true sages in this land was the form that matched Luo Fan's predecessor Taoist body. The probability was probably less than 1 in 100 million. Therefore, it was obvious that the figure of this rare treasure was only in the form of a human because of the change. This was the form of the predecessor Taoist body that Luo Fan knew. After understanding this, how could Luo Fan not know what to do? At this moment, countless questions emerged from the bottom of his heart, and very quickly, the answer appeared in his heart out of nowhere. In just a few breaths, he felt that he had a new understanding of true sage and cultivation in the future. There was only a wonderful feeling of being reborn. Let's see how far away I am from a true sage. With this thought in mind, he raised his hand and patted the void in front of him. In this instant, countless strange lines appeared out of thin air, and in the blink of an eye, a piece of land was constructed in the void in front of him. Everything in this piece of land was completely formed by laws. Laws were the most fundamental building units of this land. Everything in it, whether it was time, space, matter, energy, or other more subtle and mysterious things, was completely formed by the mysterious laws in various unbelievable ways. Compared to the previous Earth universe, this piece of land was much worse in all aspects. Although it wasn't to the extent of being broken, almost 99% of the details couldn't reach the level of perfection. Of course, compared to the vast thousand domains, it was naturally much better. This was obviously a land of laws. It was completely based on Luo Fan's worldview of laws. A land of laws. Everything about the worldview of laws was sorted out by Luo Fan himself. So his familiarity with this worldview of laws was naturally beyond the imagination of all living beings. Transforming everything about the worldview of laws into everything in this land of laws was extremely easy for him. During the entire process, he felt that it was even easier than constructing the Earth universe. Previously, building the previous Earth universe seemed to be completed with just a thought, and he didn't need to consume any essence or effort at all. At this moment, when he was building this land of laws, he actually felt an indescribable feedback from the land of laws to his body and mind. Not only did he not feel any exhaustion, but he also felt that his body was being nourished. It was a wonderful feeling that couldn't be described with words. After the land of laws took shape, a sizzling sound came from the ground. The chaotic state that could be casually smeared in the background seemed to have encountered an enemy. It began to constantly penetrate into the interior of the land of laws, gradually disintegrating the barrier of the land of laws and decomposing everything inside the land of laws bit by bit. In Luo Fan's eyes, the land of laws began to melt at a speed visible to the naked eye. In the blink of an eye, only half of the land of laws was left. Although it's far from comparable to the Earth universe, it can actually last longer in the state of chaos. Is this because the worldview of the land of laws is pure enough? Luo Fan suddenly thought to himself. This land of laws was built by Luo Fan entirely based on his own worldview of laws. Everything in it was completely in accordance with the worldview of laws. There wasn't even a trace of the structure of other worldviews. It was precisely because of this that this land of laws had so many flaws in all aspects. That was why it couldn't compare to a truly perfect land of laws in terms of level. Such a land of laws naturally couldn't compare to the Earth universe that was completely perfect in terms of level. However, the Earth universe had completely dissipated in the blink of an eye. Even Luo Fan couldn't see the interior of the entire Earth universe clearly. But now, this land of laws that was much weaker in terms of level could actually last longer. The reason for this was extremely difficult to figure out. Now that Luo Fan had the perspective of a true sage, he could see the many flaws in his land of laws at a glance. There were many ideas in his mind to make up for these flaws. In fact, if he wanted to, he could even turn the worldview of laws into a perfect land in an instant. However, even though he had this confidence, Luo Fan didn't do anything at this time. He just watched quietly as the land of laws was constantly being eroded by the chaotic state. Under the influence of the chaotic state, it gradually disintegrated and died. The reason for this was actually very simple. It was because he clearly knew that what he was making up for with the help of this perspective at this time wouldn't be his worldview at all. The perspective of a true sage came from another true sage. On the other hand, a true sage was an existence that had developed their unique worldview to a certain extreme. Such an existence's worldview wouldn't be compatible with Luo Fan's worldview in any case. Under such circumstances, no matter how Luo Fan thought and how he tried to make up for the worldview of laws, in the end, what he got was only the so-called worldview of laws. Perhaps, in a short period of time, that worldview was no different from the real worldview. However, once it developed, his worldview would inevitably be distorted and assimilated by the fundamental worldview behind the worldview that was made up for. Even if he was confident, he wouldn't be arrogant enough to think that his worldview of laws was already comparable to the worldview of a true sage. Not to mention, what he got now was not the entire realm of a true sage, but just a trace of the perspective of a true sage. This trace of perspective only slightly changed his perception of the chaotic state. In fact, it didn't even allow him to go deep into the chaotic state of the other layers. If that wasn't the case, the chaotic state he saw at this time shouldn't be in this form that resembled the background. Instead, it should have been divided into countless layers, like countless layers of space-time overlapping. Under such circumstances, how could he dare to use this perspective to make up for his worldview of laws? Perhaps it asked that question before, because it was sure that I wouldn't make that choice. Luo Fan sighed slightly. As he sighed, the land of laws had already completely collapsed in front of him. It was completely eroded and destroyed by the chaotic state. By the time Luo Fan came back to his senses, there was no longer any land of laws in front of him. Instead, there was only a boundless gray state of chaos left. Although he couldn't use the perspective of a true sage to make up for his worldview of laws, it wasn't a problem for him to see the various omissions in his worldview of laws through the perspective. At this time, although he still hadn't made any changes to his worldview of laws, he had already determined the direction in which he would make up for and perfect his worldview of laws. With such a direction, he would be able to avoid taking countless detours, making his future improvements more purposeful, and his cultivation efficiency would also be greatly improved. However, this opportunity was so rare that he certainly wouldn't just give it a try. At this moment, his heart stirred slightly, and he once again constructed a land of laws that reappeared above the chaotic state in front of him. He then carefully watched as the land of laws crumbled bit by bit under the impact and erosion of the chaotic state. Although it was the same process last time, he still diverted some of his attention to think about other things and didn't focus all his attention on it. Chapter 2643. Obviously, the results of being fully focused and being half-hearted were completely different. Although it was the same process, when Luo Fan watched the land of law completely collapse under the influence of the state of chaos this time, his heart surged with more than 10 times more insights than before. His understanding of the path became more rapid and clear, and even his cultivation realm took a big step forward. Next, Luo Fan no longer hesitated. After his land of laws was completely destroyed, he once again opened up another land of laws in front of him. Following that, the land of laws was annihilated again, opened up again, and annihilated again. Just like that, a never-ending cycle appeared. In this cycle, Luo Fan seemed to be dead set. He opened up his own land of laws again and again, and then watched helplessly as the land of laws completely collapsed and died under the erosion of the chaos. During this process, with every cycle, he would be able to comprehend things from the previous cycle, things that he had not comprehended in the previous cycle. In a trance, his understanding of the land of laws, the worldview of laws, and even the state of chaos began to be strengthened again and again. After an unknown amount of time, it felt like billions of trillions of years had passed, but it also felt like only a moment had passed. When Luo Fan came back to his senses, he found that he was still surrounded by the boundless, gray background. It was just like the first time he saw her. As soon as doubts arose in his heart, he immediately knew the answer. Although he had already repeatedly opened up the land of laws hundreds of millions of times just now. However, for the sliver of true divine's perspective that he had obtained, it was not even enough for him to spend a moment's time. In other words, from the perspective of the true sage, or rather the perspective of time from the perspective of the true sage, the countless cycles were equivalent to the blink of an eye for an ordinary person. As for the boundless state of chaos in front of him, time had no effect at all. How mysterious. At this moment, Luo Fan had this inexplicable thought. If that's the case, if I place this chance on this cycle, perhaps it can last forever. Or according to my understanding, forever. This thought emerged from the bottom of his heart. However, after going through billions of cycles, he felt that his understanding of the world of laws, the land of laws, and the background of the chaotic state had reached a certain limit. Under such a limit, no matter how many times he persisted, no matter how many times he cycled, even if it was on the order of trillions of times, it would be difficult for him to make any further progress. At that moment, he could only move his heart slightly and start to explore the other changes that this true saint's perspective could bring to him. The state of primal chaos is layered. What am I seeing now? Is it a certain level, or something else? This question appeared in his mind at this moment. And along with this question came the answer to this question. The state of chaos that he saw in front of him was not only a complete state of chaos, but also a layer of the state of chaos. Or perhaps, in the eyes of a true saint, there was no essential difference between the entirety of the state of chaos and a certain layer. If there was any difference, perhaps it would be the difference between looking at something from the front and looking at something from the side. This is a hole. Then what's with the hole that I knew in the past? Moreover, why is this place so empty? There's only a canvas waiting for me to paint. In the state of chaos, isn't there a perfect land everywhere? Even if it's not as densely packed as I imagined, there should be some, right? As he answered that question, more questions emerged in his mind. And similarly, along with these questions, the answers to these questions emerged. At this moment, Luo Fan's eyes suddenly lit up. So that's how it is. So true saints actually cultivate, and their cultivation is actually like this. In a trance, he had already understood many things. The state of chaos was a strange state where everything that all living creatures and cultivators could imagine was mixed together. In this state, there were matter, energy, time, space, rules, great Tao, and everything that other living creatures could imagine at the same time. However, they were not put together in an orderly manner that ordinary living creatures could understand. Instead, they were mixed together in an absolutely chaotic manner. In such an existence, the flow of time was obviously also absolutely chaotic. This also resulted in the perfect flow of time in the state of chaos. If one looked at the state of chaos as a whole, they would be completely independent from each other. It could even be said that they were contradictory. It was uncertain. In the overall state of chaos, the flow of time in some places might be flowing in reverse, while the flow of time in some places might be twisting, spiraling, and advancing in a spiral manner, while the flow of time in some places might be intermittent, and so on and so forth. Almost as long as one could think of it, the flow of time in those places could be any one of them. In this case, any two perfect lands would not be able to communicate with each other normally. Perhaps after a single sentence was said, when it reached the other side, it would already be in the past before this type of communication was established. Perhaps when a certain sentence was passed on, the other world would already be in the infinitely distant future, and even the person you were talking to would have already perished countless years ago. Perhaps when a sentence was passed to the other side, it would already be infinitely far in the future, and even the person you were talking to would have already passed away countless years ago. And obviously, there were so many lands in the state of chaos, and there were so many lands. Among them, almost every land, Even the perfect lands had a true sage. To a true sage, they could choose not to communicate. However, if it was because of the environment that they could not communicate with each other, it would be a form of humiliation. It was precisely because of this that at some point in time, when the first true sage was born in the state of chaos, they had already started to solve this restriction. And their solution to this restriction was none other than to divide the state of chaos into layers. After dividing the layers, the absolute chaos would naturally be given order, and with order, to a true sage, it would naturally not be an obstacle. Don't forget, after dividing the layers, existences below the true sage level could use certain methods to travel in that layer, let alone true sages. If this method of stratification was changed, it would be the cultivation direction of the true sage level that the true sages had found for themselves. True sages were already omniscient, and omnipotent. Traveling in the state of chaos was like traveling in normal time and space, completely unaffected. From the point of view of existences below the true sage level, this seemed to be the peak of cultivation, the end of sublimation. However, obviously, a true sage would not think so. As long as they felt the restriction, as long as they felt the shackles, as long as they felt that their wishes could not be carried out, it meant that they were not at the peak, nor was it the end. Obviously, this state of chaos was a restriction on them. The strange characteristics of the state of chaos blocked their communication with each other. It was the shackles, the source of their wishes being unable to be carried out. Therefore, solving this restriction was a way for them to improve themselves. From the perspective of solving this restriction, the path that they took was also the correct path of cultivation. At least, it was already the correct direction of cultivation. Therefore, dividing the state of chaos into layers, giving order to the originally chaotic state of chaos, could naturally be regarded as a kind of cultivation direction for them. As for how they divided the state of chaos, the answer that Luo Fan had obtained from the true sage's perspective was that they reflected their own worldview in the state of chaos. With their own worldview, they stabilized a certain part of the state of chaos, and then separated this part of the state of chaos from the overall state of chaos, turning it into a certain layer within the state of chaos. Because of the mysteriousness of the worldview, and because of the limitlessness and wonder of the state of chaos, this separation of a certain layer would not have any effect on the state of chaos. The same piece of chaos, no matter how many trillions of layers it was divided into, the overall nature of the state of chaos would not have any changes because of this. It would still be the same as when it had not been divided into layers, or more accurately, it would still be the same as when it had not been divided into layers. Of course, how one's own worldview could divide the state of chaos into layers, there was a standard, and there was also a way to improve it. However, these were not the answers that Luo Fan had obtained from the true sage's perspective could give him. From the answers that Luo Fan had obtained, he only knew that the cultivation method of the true sage seemed to be completely different from what he understood. It was a more mysterious and ingenious cultivation method. However, as for what it was exactly, it was hidden in the boundless fog, although there was no way to obtain the specific cultivation method of the true sage. Luo Fan was already quite satisfied in his heart. He was naturally curious about the cultivation method of a true sage. However, to him, it was obviously something that was extremely far away. Now that he knew, he could at most satisfy his own curiosity. In comparison, what he knew now was already enough to further his understanding of the state of chaos. Unknowingly, his worldview had already expanded by a large margin. The worldview was his understanding of the world. It was his understanding of the composition of the world, the composition of the land, the composition of the state of chaos, and even the composition of the state before the state of chaos, and so on. Under such circumstances, the deepening of his understanding of the nature of the state of chaos would naturally affect the worldview of laws, greatly expanding the contents of many aspects of the state of chaos. Of course, this kind of expansion was only preliminary at this time. If he wanted to completely transform this expansion into a part of his worldview of laws, make it perfectly integrate with his worldview of laws, and truly become one with his worldview of laws, it would obviously take him a certain amount of time to sort it out. However, even so, for Luo Fan, it was already enough to make the land of laws he had opened up undergo great changes. With a slight thought, Luo Fan raised his hand and patted the state of chaos in front of him. With this pat, a land of laws appeared out of thin air in front of him. The interior of this land of laws wasn't much different from before. But on the outside, in terms of the way it coexisted with the state of chaos, it was already vastly different from before. The various subtle changes greatly weakened the corrosive effect of the chaotic state of the outside world on this worldview. Although the land of laws was still retreating in defeat before the state of chaos, it was also constantly being eroded by the state of chaos, collapsing and disintegrating at every moment. However, according to the speed of the erosion, the time that the land of laws could last was at least 10 times longer than before. Just by expanding one's cognition a little, one would be able to extend one's time by more than 10 times. In the future, when he truly integrated the gains from this expansion into his worldview and perfected his worldview, one could only look forward to seeing how much improvement he would get. Soon, the land of laws had completely disintegrated under the erosion of the state of chaos, turning into nothingness, causing the background of the state of chaos to return to what he had seen at the beginning. Luo Fan was already very familiar with this kind of disintegration. At this time, he immediately took action and began to open up the land of laws again. He once again felt the entire process of the disintegration and destruction of the state of chaos. At this moment, he felt a sense of exhaustion emerge from the depths of his heart. Immediately afterward, the light and shadow in front of him changed. Then, everything in front of his eyes disintegrated. Before he could react, everything was already irreversible. The vision in his eyes had completely broken away from the perspective of a true sage and was restored to the perspective of a peak sixth tribulation powerhouse. Compared to the perspective of a true sage, it was unknown how many levels of difference it was. It even made Luo Fan think of destroying everything because of this sudden decline. What's going on? Why did it break away? At this moment, this was the only doubt in his heart. Chapter 26:44. Could it be that my connection with the state of chaos has changed? Suddenly, such a possibility emerged from the bottom of Luo Fan's heart, causing the expression on his face to freeze. Thinking about it carefully wasn't the only difference between the last time he opened up the land of laws and the last time he opened up the land of laws was the addition of his understanding of the state of chaos through the perspective of the true saint. If this change was really caused by the difference, then there seemed to be only one possibility. Thinking of this, he looked around, trying to get the answer to his question from the projection of the rare treasure. However, it was a pity that no matter how he searched, there was no other matter in this area except for him. As for the existence that he thought was the projection of the rare treasure, it had disappeared at some point. Luo Fan released his perception and used all his means to sense the surroundings, looking for any traces that might exist in the surroundings and the projection of the rare treasure. With a slight movement in his heart, he already understood that it had only been a moment since he saw the projection of the rare treasure. In such a short period of time, ordinary creatures wouldn't even be able to react. However, in such a short period of time, Luo Fan had already undergone an astonishing transformation. At this moment, he still found that he was no longer restricted by this place. His strength had completely recovered to the level of a peak sixth tribulation powerhouse before he stepped into this place. In fact, he even faintly felt that as long as he exerted a little more strength, he could break through the limits of this realm and be comparable to a seventh tribulation powerhouse. Moreover, he wouldn't just be a beginner seventh tribulation powerhouse, but a powerhouse who had already gone very far in the seventh tribulation realm and might already come into contact with the eighth tribulation realm. Is this the special benefit of coming into contact with a rare treasure? An inexplicable expression appeared on Luo Fan's face. There was some joy on his face, but also some sigh. What he was happy about was that these benefits meant that his strength in this area had been greatly enhanced. However, he sighed because this benefit had arrived, But it wasn't a good time, because this meant that his seventh great tribulation could descend at any time. It should be known that the reason why Luo Fan was able to increase his strength without any restrictions in this place, without worrying about the Great Tribulation, was because he was restricted by this place. Although his essence did not change, the strength he could display in this place was far lower than his true strength. In other words, it was far lower than the level that could trigger the seventh Great Tribulation. The seventh Great Tribulation seemed to be deceived by this place. It could only recognize the strength that he could display in this place, and it regarded this strength as his true strength, his true realm. Therefore, the great earthly tribulation would not descend prematurely because of his increase in cultivation. Under such circumstances, his current strength was no longer restricted, and he could also display his true strength in this area, which had already reached the standard of triggering the seventh major tribulation. The deceptive effect of this area was obviously no longer effective. The Great Tribulation would obviously bring forward the process that had been stagnant for a long time. With his current realm that could even match up to cultivators who had reached the seventh Great Tribulation realm, the advancement of the seventh Great Tribulation would obviously be considerable. Directly compressing the original 300 million years of time into an instant was something that couldn't be any more normal. At this moment, the strange place that he had entered gradually collapsed. As it collapsed, Luo Fan felt an indescribable repulsive force on him, and his body began to rapidly move outwards under the effect of this repulsive force. Not long after, he had already returned to the place that was filled with mysterious existences. In other words, only he and the other 8 cultivators existed in the mysterious space-time that was 2 levels deep in the world of laws at that instant. As he appeared, the entire mysterious existence trembled slightly, and it collapsed abruptly. The moment it collapsed, the space-time that was formed by the many nodes of the world of laws also began to rapidly tremble. What's going on? The 8 cultivators had no idea what was going on at this moment. At this moment, they were filled with anticipation as they prepared to explore the various deep secrets that existed in this space-time, but they did not expect that the entire space-time would actually collapse before they could take any action. At this moment, the countless cracks that covered the entire space, the endless traces of destruction, and even the aura of destruction that was emitted from it all told them that this was no longer a place that they could explore and where the deep secrets were hidden. This place had already become a ruin. Fortunately, although these cultivators were restricted by this place and could not fully display their strength, they still used various methods to raise the strength that they could display to the level of a second tribulation powerhouse. Although the state of the collapse of this space-time felt abrupt and hasty to them, it was ultimately just abrupt and hasty. In the end, there would not be any real danger. At this moment, the 8 cultivators used all sorts of methods to protect themselves. Their figures followed the repulsive force of this space-time and headed out. Not long after, they returned to the space-time with countless nodes and also saw a huge number of cultivators that did not exist here before, which numbered in the trillions. At this moment, the entire space-time was trembling, and strange, muffled rumbles constantly sounded from the various nodes. The entire space-time seemed to be trembling because of these sounds. What's happening inside? The voices gathered towards the 8 cultivators, turning into a huge sound wave that drowned them in an instant. Although there were trillions of cultivators in this space-time, none of the cultivators here were simple. Although there were trillions of cultivators in this space-time, none of the cultivators here were simple. Although there were trillions of them. However, almost the instant the 8 of them appeared, all the cultivators had already locked onto them. At this moment, who knew how many trillions of gazes were fixed on the 8 cultivators? Even though they looked very unusual, even though the strength they displayed was in fact stronger than most of the cultivators here, none of the cultivators had any intention of retreating. The secret that the 8 of them possessed was too important to them. It was related to the final secret of this world of laws, and also the biggest secret. If they could get their hands on this secret, all of their efforts and all of their expenses in this area would be worth it. Under such circumstances, how could any of the cultivators back down? Being stared at by so many cultivators, the 8 of them could not help but secretly tremble at this moment, even though they had firm willpower. It must be known that among the trillions of cultivators here, more than half of them were not inferior to them in terms of intrinsic quality. In other words, more than half of them could be dealt with by just one of them alone. And now, there were trillions of them. Facing this situation, even though there were powerhouses who had undergone 6 or 7 tribulations, they could not remain calm. At this moment, the space-time trembled more and more violently, and there were faint signs that it was about to collapse. However, none of the cultivators paid attention to this at this moment. Even if the space-time collapsed, it was just a normal thing for the cultivators and would not affect them at all. In comparison, knowing what exactly was happening below and where the treasures that might exist were clearly more important to them. At this moment, these cultivators naturally would not hide it for the sake of their pride. In any case, to them, there was nothing to hide about what was happening below. Thus, they calmly recounted everything that had happened below. Hearing their words, some of the trillions of cultivators believed them, while some did not. For a moment, there was some chaos. Originally, these cultivators had already formed an exploration alliance, but now, these alliances had automatically collapsed without needing to be attacked. After all, they formed an alliance to explore the secret hidden under this space-time. Now that the existence under this space-time had collapsed, why would they still need to form an alliance? Of course, not all cultivators thought like this. Some cultivators naturally wanted to maintain the alliance. However, the situation was stronger than the people. Even if they wanted to maintain the alliance, they could not go against the general trend. In a situation where most of the cultivators wanted to disband the alliance, what could the few cultivators who wanted to maintain the alliance do? Just as the cultivators fell into chaos, the space-time trembled more and more violently. Finally, at a certain moment, an endless impact erupted from the nodes. Amidst the impact, all the cultivators in the space-time simultaneously felt an irresistible and terrifying power acting on them. The power did not destroy them, but it enveloped them. Through various unimaginable methods, the space-time in their eyes began to change in an indescribable way. In the end, it turned into a strange existence that even the cultivators who had broken through the rules of this world with their own abilities could not understand. Finally, when everything calmed down, all the cultivators realized that they had returned to the place where they were before they entered this space-time. It was also the place where the rules of the world were located. Everything changed. At this moment, the expressions of the thousands of cultivators who had broken through the rules of the world with their own abilities changed drastically. The changes in front of them clearly meant that even they could no longer see the space-time. This was the treatment of the cultivators who had entered the world with the help of the invitation letters. An indescribable fear appeared in their hearts, causing them to involuntarily make all sorts of indescribable guesses. The loss of their advantage was secondary. Most importantly, they were worried that they had completely lost the last chance to obtain the rare treasure. At this moment, in the world of laws, the tide of laws that had stagnated for a long time had appeared once again. This time, the tide of laws did not come in waves or patches like before. Instead, it spread throughout the entire world of laws, enveloping every region, every source of laws, and everything in this world. In other words, at this moment, whether it was the cultivators who had entered the world with the invitation letters, or the cultivators who had broken through the way of entry with their own abilities, the entire world of laws revealed the truth that everything in it was the source of laws. This was originally a shocking change of fortune, but not many cultivators paid much attention to it at this moment. Most of the cultivators had their attention on the 8 cultivators at the moment. This drastic change had already exceeded the content of their previous explanations. All the cultivators believed that what was happening below was definitely more complicated than what the 8 cultivators had imagined. Right now, the only way for them to understand this change was obviously through the 8 cultivators. Under such circumstances, How could they not pay attention to the 8 cultivators? What exactly are you guys hiding? Finally, a cultivator asked. The 8 cultivators could only smile bitterly. What do they hide? They already knew everything. In fact, many things that shouldn't have happened had already happened. They also wanted to know what else they had yet to reveal. Fellow Taoists, just think about it, and you'll know that we have no need to hide anything. There's only one rare treasure. If we were really hiding something, we wouldn't have been able to cooperate so well, one of the cultivators said. Some people believed this explanation, but it was obvious that most people didn't believe it. Anything could happen in the world of cultivation, let alone in this place where nothing was strange. According to common sense, there was indeed no need for them to hide anything, and it was impossible for them to not hold any grudges against each other after obtaining some benefits. But with this, it would be very difficult for them to do anything. Who could be certain of anything that happened in this place? Since you guys don't believe us, then there's nothing we can do. If you guys want to come, then let's fight. Another cultivator frowned and said coldly. They were also rather arrogant experts. The reason why they were so cooperative when they were interrogated by so many cultivators was because they didn't feel that there was a need to hide what they were being interrogated. They weren't completely terrified, now that they couldn't explain it, and those cultivators insisted that they reveal something they didn't know. They could only put away their thoughts of not causing trouble and prepare to fight with those cultivators first. Chapter 26:45. Although the trillions of cultivators who were not weaker than them gave them a great deal of pressure, there was still a limit to the strength these cultivators could unleash. In this way, the worst that could happen to them was to die a few times in the eyes of this world. Although the loss was not small, it was not unacceptable. This was especially so when they were being pressured by trillions of cultivators. A huge battle was about to break out, and it seemed like it could not be avoided at all. At this moment, all the cultivators suddenly felt an indescribable repulsive force acting on their bodies. Regardless of whether it was the cultivators who had used their own methods to see through the mysteries of the world of laws, or the cultivators who had used the invitations to step into the world of laws, all of them felt the same terrifying repulsive force that they could not resist at all. Under this repulsive force, they couldn't even react in time before they were all expelled from the world of laws, returning to the world outside the world of laws, to a world that was countless times larger than the world of laws. There were trillions of cultivators in the world of laws, which was considered quite a lot. At a glance, it was already quite densely packed. It was precisely because of this density that it was possible for trillions of cultivators to surround and attack 8 cultivators. However, when all the cultivators were expelled from the world of laws and stepped into the world of laws, the situation was already different. This was because the vastness of the world had increased by trillions of times. This caused the distance between the cultivators who were originally the closest to each other to increase by trillions of times. This was equivalent to pulling the distance between the cultivators who were originally the closest to each other to the distance between the cultivators who were the furthest away from each other in the world of laws. In this way, the encirclement was inexplicably resolved, and the 8 cultivators were no longer a threat. Of course, at this moment, the trillions of cultivators no longer had any interest in dealing with these 8 cultivators. When someone made a mistake, and the mistake was still within the scope of understanding, and was still within the scope of barely stopping the loss, the person who made the mistake would most likely be pursued. However, when the consequences of this person's mistake reached a point where no matter what he did, no one would be in the mood to pursue this matter anymore. This kind of thing was the same no matter what level or world one was at. It was the same even for those who had reached the level of these cultivators. Previously, these cultivators had only been expelled from the strange space-time in the depths of the world of laws. Although the consequences were quite severe, at least they were still in the world of laws. Compared to existences outside the world of laws, the cultivation environment still had an advantage. Under such circumstances, they naturally had the intention to hold the 8 cultivators accountable. They wanted to interrogate the 8 cultivators and find out exactly what caused them to suffer such losses. However, Now that they had been expelled from the world of laws, the situation was clearly different. Being expelled meant that they no longer had the advantage of a cultivation environment. It meant that from now on, they could only be like the cultivators who could not step into the world of laws, of course of laws, and of laws. They could only search for opportunities like headless flies. Before the fundamental change of cultivation, the benefits and losses and the consequences and so on were all secondary. At this moment, the most important thing was to return to the world of laws and regain their cultivation advantages. After this moment of anxiety, the cultivators who had used the invitation letters to enter the world of laws were suddenly filled with an indescribable sense of excitement. Everyone had been expelled from the world of laws. Didn't that mean that all their previous relationships had been erased? Didn't that mean that they could start anew from the restrictions they had previously suffered? It should be noted that they had initially accepted the invitation letters and used the invitation letters to enter the world of laws because they did not know what kind of losses they would suffer. However, it was not that they did not have the ability to enter the world of laws with their own abilities. At least, that was the case for most of the cultivators for many years. They had an inexplicable thought that if they had the chance to do it all over again, they would definitely do this and that. And now, it seemed like the chance to do it all over again had arrived. With this thought in mind, most of the cultivators no longer had any thoughts of pursuing the matter of the 8 cultivators. On the contrary, they actually felt a hint of gratitude towards the 8 cultivators. By then, the cultivators had completely shifted their attention away from the 8 cultivators to the world around them. They began to scatter like the stars and clouds as they flew towards various parts of the world. Evidently, they wanted to find the source of laws that could allow them to enter the world of laws, or perhaps an existence similar to the source of laws. Are we? All right. One of the 8 cultivators mumbled with a complicated expression. Just now, they were clearly prepared to fight with their lives on the line, and they even struggled mentally for a long time. In the end, when they were ready and finished their mental struggle, the other party didn't give them a chance at all, and all the enemies disappeared without trace. How could they remain calm after this? However, the 8 cultivators were now extremely far apart. At this moment, they could only talk to themselves. It was no longer as convenient for them to communicate with each other. Although there were quite a lot of cultivators who entered the world of laws, it was only a small portion of the cultivators in this world. At this moment, many cultivators were expelled from the world of laws and returned to this world. The huge commotion naturally attracted the attention of the cultivators who were tirelessly searching for opportunities in this world. At this moment, the cultivators all began to move and began to ask around about what had happened. Once the number of cultivators increased, it was naturally difficult to hide the secret. Very quickly, they learned about the existence of the world of laws, as well as the various changes within the world of laws. When they learned about this, the cultivators in this world instantly went into an uproar. Although some cultivators already knew about this, most only now did they know that there was such an incredible world of laws hidden in the depths of this world. There was actually such an incredible treasure in the world of laws. Someone must have obtained something related to the treasure. Now that the treasure has undergone some sort of change, it finally caused such a change in the world of laws. The onlookers had a clearer view of the situation. The cultivators who had just received the news quickly analyzed the various changes and found some plausible explanations. After hearing this explanation, the cultivators who had left the world of laws seemed to have woken up from a dream and suddenly understood what was going on. Compared to the bystanders, the cultivators who had lived in the world of laws for hundreds of millions of years had a deeper understanding of the world of laws, and they knew that the rare treasures had existed for a longer time. After obtaining the train of thought, they could naturally think more deeply, and it would be easier for them to find the various reflections needed to solve a certain problem. As they pondered, they began to find various proofs of this possibility. With these proofs, they became more and more convinced of the existence of this possibility. In fact, some cultivators even vaguely guessed that this might mean that a new existence related to the treasure would be refreshed, and they would also have a chance to obtain something similar. Moreover, this might not be the first time a similar existence had been obtained by a living being. If this was really the case, then all the strange things that happened before could be explained. For example, why did they know about the existence of the treasure when no one had obtained it before? Some of the more brilliant cultivators, on the other hand, had an indescribable worry in their hearts. Many questions had been answered, but at the same time, new questions had appeared. Moreover, this new question was probably even more alarming than the questions that had already been explained. If that's really the case, then perhaps there will be a shocking upheaval next. This thought flashed through some cultivators' minds, causing them to become inexplicably vigilant. As they became more vigilant, the behavior of the many cultivators that were scattered across this world immediately became different. Some were still extremely eager to find a way to enter the world of laws. For this reason, they began to continuously explore and search everywhere in this world. However, there's also a small portion of them who began to carefully set up defensive measures that could deal with all sorts of disasters, as if they were preparing to face some sort of disaster. Vaguely, there seemed to be some sort of pressure spreading out from somewhere, spreading throughout this world. Some cultivators with extremely sharp senses seemed to have sensed it, and they felt an increasingly intense sense of unease. At this moment, Luo Fan had already appeared in an extremely ordinary place in this world. Unlike the 8 cultivators, when he was expelled from that mystical place, he didn't appear in the strange space-time outside, nor did he appear in the world of laws. Instead, he arrived at his destination in one step and was directly slapped into this world. Compared to those who were forcefully expelled from the world of laws not long ago, he had already been here for a long time. Compared to the bewilderment and uneasiness of the other cultivators, he knew better what changes were about to occur in this world. That's right, he had already confirmed the guess that those sharp-minded cultivators had made. That after he obtained the projection of the rare treasure, a new projection would appear, and a new opportunity would appear in this world, waiting for the countless cultivators in this world to obtain it. Apart from that, he had also confirmed that there was indeed a certain rare treasure in this world. However, in reality, for all the cultivators that entered this world, no one had a chance of obtaining that rare treasure. No matter how lucky one was, no matter how strong one was at most, they could only be like Luo Fan, who obtained the projection of that rare treasure. Once the projection was obtained by a cultivator, this world would activate a certain set of rules that had been set when it was first created. The rules were none other than to completely erase everyone's memories of the world of laws, the invitation, the strange space-time, and the wondrous place beneath the strange space-time, apart from the cultivators who had already obtained the projection of the rare treasure. However, this did not mean that the cultivators who had obtained the projection of the rare treasure would be unscathed. They would be able to watch as the cultivators who had endless knowledge of this world turned into the blank pieces of paper. The rules would also affect the cultivators who had obtained the projection of the rare treasure. However, the effect was not to erase their memories, but to expel them from this world. In other words, Luo Fan could only wait for this world to expel him, just like how the cultivators could only wait for this world to completely erase their memories of the world of laws, the strange space-time, and the wondrous place. It can't be that it's just reincarnation, right? As he sensed the various comprehensions in his heart, Luo Fan could not help but smile bitterly. If the memories of all the cultivators were erased and the world remained the same, the world of laws would still be the same, and the restrictions would still be the same, then in Luo Fan's eyes, it would be tasteless. With the combined efforts of so many true sages and the powers of so many great heavens and earth, the land of opportunity could only rely on erasing memories to test the cultivators in the same reincarnation cycle. No matter how one looked at it, it did not seem right. Very soon, Luo Fan was able to see if the changes in this world were tasteless. In that instant, an indescribable ripple swept through the entire world. Chapter 2646. This fluctuation was very strange. It was not like the fluctuation that cultivators could control. It was just a kind of power, an extraordinary carrier. It was like it was released by the source of this world, a fluctuation that surpassed the limits of what ordinary living beings could sense. The moment this fluctuation appeared, apart from Luo Fan, no cultivator in this world felt anything. Even if the nature of these cultivators might be powerful enough to surpass the 6th or 7 tribulation powerhouses, it seemed to be the same. To them, everything was so normal. This world was still the same as before, and the countless opportunities were still placed in front of them. In fact, even they themselves were still the same as before. After this fluctuation swept past, all the cultivators silently forgot many things. Moreover, this kind of forgetting was so mysterious that even they themselves had no way of discovering what they had forgotten. They couldn't even sense the slightest abnormality. Everything seemed so normal. Seeing this scene, Luo Fan could not help but feel a chill down his spine. At this moment, he suddenly wondered if he had encountered this fluctuation before and if he had forgotten some memories because of it. After all, if this really happened, he had no way to verify at all, whether it was his memories, his senses, or the surrounding environment. Everything made him feel a trace of abnormality. Perhaps I can verify it from the time of the 7th disaster. This thought emerged from the bottom of his heart. However, before he could heave a sigh of relief, he quickly smiled bitterly. The time of the arrival of the 7th tribulation was also something in his memory. Who knew if his memory had been altered? Perhaps the time of the 7th tribulation that he felt was already a shortened time? There really are no flaws. In the end, Luo Fan could only sigh inwardly. That fluctuation not only changed the memories of the many living beings, but it also changed the entire world, causing everything in this world to change drastically in an instant. The topography of the earth changed naturally. Even the laws that connected and enveloped the entire world, space, and even the restrictions on cultivators. Everything underwent an indescribable change in an instant. In just the blink of an eye, Luo Fan felt that he was no longer in the original world. Instead, he had arrived at a brand new world that was completely different from before. Although Luo Fan had so many psychological changes during the whole process, in fact, the whole process didn't even take a moment. In fact, let alone a moment, even the shortest time unit to describe it might not necessarily be as short as this process. Even Luo Fan felt his vision blur, and the entire world seemed to have changed drastically. At this moment, Luo Fan felt an indescribable repulsive force acting on his body. Along with this repulsive force, an indescribable hole seemed to appear in his body out of nowhere. It began to frantically suck at his body and everything within it, causing his body to shrink in the blink of an eye. It began to shrink at an unimaginable speed into an indiscernible dot, and it was directly sucked into the hole that was constantly sucking his body. Soon after, he completely disappeared from this world. As for him, he once again appeared in the mysterious chaotic state outside of this world. Vaguely, there was an incomparably mysterious and wonderful force that enveloped him and brought him in a certain direction. In this chaotic state, time had no meaning. Moreover, due to some special mechanism, he couldn't even sense his 7th tribulation, which he should have been able to sense no matter which world he was in from the state of chaos. It was as if the force that enveloped him had already isolated him from the chaotic state. Is this the chaotic layer created by a true divine? Looking at the endless stars around him through the force, Luo Fan thought to himself. In the past, in his eyes, this chaotic state was only unfathomable. At most, he could only know that it was a certain layer of the chaotic state. However, now, after experiencing the projection of the rare treasure that gave him a trace of the perspective of a true divine, he realized that the things that he could see and the things that he could feel were much more than before, although it was still insignificant compared to this chaotic state. It's almost like a blank slate. Is this the worldview of a true divine? Or is this a special worldview that many true sages have specially built for this layer? The strongest feeling that the surroundings gave him was purity. It was a kind of purity that was different from any other world different from any worldview and different from anything that Luo Fan had encountered in the past countless years. In fact, strictly speaking, the word pure seemed to lack some meaning compared to the feeling of the surroundings. If it was in the past, he would definitely be confused about this and would not know what it was. At most, he would only think that this was an inherent characteristic of a layer of the chaotic state. However, this time, because of the increase in his knowledge brought by the perspective of a true divine, he understood the significance of the chaotic state to a true divine. He knew that this purity was most likely due to a certain characteristic of the worldview that was combined with this chaotic state. Coupled with the origin of the many heavens and earths in this chaotic state, and the fact that they were created by the combined efforts of many true sages, he already understood that perhaps this was a special worldview that was specially created by many true sages for this level. As for how the worldview became pure, how it was specially built, and how it could become a state that had no characteristics but could integrate all characteristics, this was not something that Luo Fan could understand with his current knowledge. Perhaps, only when he became a true divine would he be able to understand. Although it was only a layer of the chaotic state that was specially created by a true divine, the chaotic state was still the chaotic state after all. After all, this was not the kind of transportation layer that was specially used for the existence below the true divine level to travel. Therefore, with Luo Fan's strength in his nature, he still could not freely travel in this chaotic state. For him, only by relying on the surrounding force that wrapped around him, he would not be completely eroded and assimilated by the surrounding chaotic state, and eventually become a part of the chaotic state and disappear without a trace. While this force protected him, it also restricted him, so that he could only follow the direction of this force and move forward to a fixed goal. If he was not surprised, that fixed goal was the Tao Master's Road in the Tao Master universe. Moreover, it was very likely to be the fifth layer of the Tao Master's Road. In this chaotic state, time did not matter at all. With the protection of the force, he could even isolate the senses of the chaotic state, which meant that if he wanted to, he had endless time to squander. At this time, regardless of anything, Luo Fan directly closed his eyes and began to feel all the changes that had occurred after his previous upgrade. At this moment, between his body and mind, all the previous upgrades he had obtained in that part of the world were turned into his cultivation at an unimaginable speed, turned into his strength, and became resources for his growth. Of course, in this process, he intentionally suppressed the real upgrade of his realm, and only tried his best to adapt to his previous gains and digest them. That was because he knew that if his cultivation level did not change, then he would have an endless amount of time here. After all, in the chaotic state, time did not matter. All the speed of the flow of time here obviously depended on him. It was his space-time dimension, his understanding of time, that determined how much time he could spend here. In other words, how much time could he feel? Under such circumstances, if he did not change, then it would not be a problem for him to spend as many hundreds of millions of years as he wanted. However, as long as he broke this unchanging, then, no matter how short a time he spent, even if it was the smallest unit of time, he would instantly break this balance. The chaotic state would help him determine the time, allowing him to instantly break away from the protection of the force, and personally face his seventh major tribulation, which was eyeing him covetously and could fall at any time. Of course, whether it was hundreds of millions of years, or just the smallest unit of time, when he broke away from the force, he would definitely return to the Tao Master's Road. This was for sure. The existence of the force was to send him to his destination, unless he had the strength to resist this force. Otherwise, no matter what he did, it would be impossible to change this force to achieve its goal. And obviously, this force, if put bluntly, came from that part of the world created by many true saints. Fundamentally speaking, it came from a true saint. Could Luo Fan's strength be stronger than a true saint's? Therefore, the only changes he could make in this chaotic state were his own senses. He couldn't do anything about this power or the entire process of this power accomplishing its goal. After an unknown period of time, it seemed to be hundreds of millions of years, but it also seemed to be just a few short hours. At a certain moment, Luo Fan's heart trembled. He could not lock onto his realm, and his cultivation realm suddenly leaped up a little. During this leap, he suddenly felt that the place where he was had undergone an earth-shaking change. The force that had originally wrapped around him had completely disappeared at this time, and a long-lost sense of familiarity came into his heart. I came back without a sound. At this moment, Luo Fan could not help but sigh in his heart. He had already understood what was going on. He opened his eyes and looked around, and found that he had indeed returned to the 5th floor of the Tao Master's path. He had returned to the forbidden area that he ruled, and felt that he had integrated into the forbidden area with a slight jolt in his heart. He already knew that it had been 30 million years since he left the 5th floor of the Tao Master's path. This period of time was not too long for the cultivators on the 5th floor and above. It was even more so for Luo Fan. However, after 30 million years, Luo Fan had already felt that this forbidden area of his had undergone earth-shattering changes. This change had caused the forbidden area to no longer be a forbidden area. On the edge of the forbidden area, in all directions, there were countless roads that had been opened up all the way to the place where he had opened up the Tall Tower Continent. And on the edge of the Tall Tower Continent, there were not only thousands, but even tens of thousands of cities that were similar to the one that had existed in the past. Like satellites of the Tall Tower Continent, they revolved around the Tall Tower Continent in a cycle. The number of cultivators in the Spire Continent was thousands of times more than it used to be. Among them, most of them were foreign cultivators. These were the relatives and friends of 5th Tribulation, 6th Tribulation, and 7th Tribulation experts. Among them, there were strong and weak ones. The strong ones had even entered the Tribulation realm, while the weak ones had not even reached the innate Great Luo realm. After all, Luo Fan's imprint was still in the Forbidden Land, and his control over the Forbidden Land was not reduced at all. At this time, with a slight movement of his heart, he already knew the many subtle changes that had occurred in the continent of the Tall Tower. Over the past 30 million years, countless foreign cultivators had obviously made many modifications to the continent of the Tall Tower. Now, the rules here were more complicated, and although the various mechanisms were not perfect, they were more friendly to the outsiders. Of course, the result of this was that the already extremely slow speed of cultivation had unknowingly slowed down a lot more. Now, this place had practically become an ordinary training ground. An ordinary training ground for the relatives and friends of the 5 Tribulation, 6 Tribulation, and 7 Tribulation experts. They no longer regarded the Tall Tower Continent as their hope to break through, but as their hope to raise their cultivation realm to the 5th Tribulation experts. Some cultivators even purely regarded the Tall Tower Continent as a place for them to have fun with their relatives and friends, and even as a place for them to socialize with each other. Chapter 26:47. Luo Fan's heart did not waver in the slightest when he saw this. Although he was the one who created the Spire Continent, he had already obtained enough from it. After giving up on the Spire Continent, it had become a special space-time that he was familiar with. Even if the Spire Continent were to be destroyed, he would not feel too much. At this moment, it would just lose its original appearance and become a tourist attraction. What was the big deal about that? With a slight movement of his mind, all the cultivators in the forbidden area were already included in his perception. Among the many cultivators, there were only 3 7th Tribulation experts from the 7th floor of the Tao Master's path. Moreover, the 3 7 Tribulation powerhouses were quite casual about the continent of the Tall Pagoda, as if they just treated it as a place for fun. Their attitude towards the continent of the Tall Pagoda was completely different from the attitude of the 7 Tribulation powerhouses before Luo Fan left. Below that, the number of 6 Tribulation experts increased by a lot. There were thousands of them. Of course, this number was much higher compared to the 7 Tribulation experts, but compared to the number of 6 Tribulation experts before Luo Fan left, it was still a far cry. At the same time, their attitude towards the High Spire Continent had changed, similar to the 7 Tribulation experts. They didn't view the High Spire Continent as highly as before. The rest were, of course, the fifth tribulation experts on the fifth floor of the Tao Master's path. Among all the cultivators, they were the ones who valued the benefits that the Spire continent could bring. Among the three existences, they were obviously the most serious about the Spire continent. Not only did they regard the Spire continent as a place for their relatives and friends to cultivate, but they also regarded the Spire continent as a place for them to cultivate. Among the many cultivators, Luo Fan saw a familiar figure. The cultivators who had entered the final land of opportunity before he left, including the cultivator who watched Luo Fan create the Spire continent, the former fifth senior brother, and many other cultivators, were all here. Moreover, from the looks of it, their status in the surrounding cities was already quite high. Obviously, all of them had obtained great benefits from the final place of fortune. Looking at these familiar and unfamiliar situations, Luo Fan had an inexplicable feeling in his heart. The root of all this could be said to be a small action that he had casually made back then. But now, this small action had changed the entire fifth level of the Tao Master's path. It could even be predicted that the entire Tao Master's path would undergo some anticipated changes because of this. How could he not be emotional under such circumstances? I didn't expect you to come back. At this time, a voice came into Luo Fan's ears. Luo Fan's heart skipped a beat, but he soon realized that this was Taoist Wui's voice. As he discovered the source of the voice, he quickly determined where Taoist Wui was. He raised his head and saw a figure materializing from nothingness amidst the boundless brilliance above his head, gradually appearing in front of him. That was, of course, Taoist Wui. At this moment, Taoist Wui had not changed much compared to before. After all, it had only been tens of millions of years. However, the way he looked at Luo Fan was very different from before. Back then, even though he clearly knew that Luo Fan had the strength to threaten them, and that he had the means comparable to a seven tribulation expert, he still could not help looking down on him. But now, he no longer looked down on him. On the contrary, it was as if he was looking at an incredible monster. That opportunity, is it really that great? It's only been such a short time, but you've already achieved such a great improvement? Taoist Wui said with a look of disbelief on his face. Naturally, he knew that Luo Fan should have chosen a way to enter a place of opportunity, left the Tao Master's path, and entered a certain place of opportunity to seize the opportunity. However, even though he knew this, he could never have imagined that the opportunity would allow Luo Fan to achieve such a great improvement. In just a short period of tens of millions of years, Luo Fan's strength seemed to have surpassed his own. When he faced Luo Fan, he actually felt an inexplicable pressure from the bottom of his heart. It was as if Luo Fan could instantly subdue him if he wanted to. Even if it was just an aura doppelganger, which was insignificant compared to the original body, it was already a miracle that he could achieve this. Normally, even a seven tribulation expert would not be able to make him feel this way. However, Yi Fuqian could clearly appear on the fifth level of the Tao Master's path. In essence, he should at most be at the level of a sixth tribulation expert. This clearly violated the rules of the Tao Master's path, and clearly violated his understanding of the Tao Master's path, and even his understanding of cultivation. In the face of such a situation, how could he not be shocked? I can't say anything about the opportunity. It's just that I'm a little puzzled as to why you're still here. This is definitely not a good place for fellow Taoist, Luo Fan said. The cultivation environment in the fifth level of the Tao Master's path was extremely perfect for a five tribulation expert. It could be said that no holy land for cultivation could compare with it. Even for a six tribulation expert, it had its redeeming qualities. However, that was only the case for experts of these two levels. For a seven tribulation expert, the cultivation environment here was extremely poor. Even if there were no restrictions, the cultivation environment alone was not enough for a seven tribulation expert to stay here. What's more, because of the rules of the Tao Master's path, any seven tribulation expert who stayed here would have to take great risks. If they were not careful and their own aura leaked out, it would bring disaster to their own aura doppelganger, and even their own body would suffer great losses. Under such circumstances, if there was no need, why would a seven tribulation expert stay here? The seven tribulation experts around, or even in the mainland of the tall pagoda, stayed here because they had a mission to accompany their friends and family. Taoist Wui obviously did not have such a reason. How could Luo Fan not be surprised? Taoist Wui came back to his senses, and his expression became calm again. He said, "I'm just a little curious as to whether you will come back. After all, the cultivation environment in that place of opportunity is not comparable to the Tao Master's path. In the past, there were also many cultivators who left, but they rarely came back." Hearing this, Luo Fan just smiled and said, "This may be one of the reasons, but it shouldn't be the whole reason." He believed that for Taoist Wui, this curiosity and this doubt would indeed be one of the reasons why he stayed here, but it would not be the whole reason. Because of this curiosity, the seven tribulation expert could do many things, but it would not include staying in a place where one careless mistake could bring a lot of damage to one's body. Not to mention, this was not just a short period of time. The time spent here, at most, could reach a terrifying period of millions of years. He did not believe that any seven tribulation expert would waste his energy on this. If this reason alone was enough, then Taoist Wui would not be the only cultivator waiting for Luo Fan's return. There would definitely be many cultivators waiting for his return. Taoist Wui smiled and said, "Why? Do you think this reason is not enough?" Of course not. If it was enough, then fellow Taoist wouldn't be the only one left here. I believe that there would be many fellow Taoists interested in whether or not I would return. Luo Fan's expression was still calm. Taoist Wui looked at Luo Fan and sighed. He said, "As expected, I can't hide it from you. I just want to make a deal with you." A deal? Luo Fan was a little curious. He didn't know what Taoist Wui wanted from him, nor did he know what Taoist Wui could give him. For him now, everything that he thought others had wasn't something that was difficult to obtain for him. As long as he wanted something, he could obtain it. As for the seven tribulation level pseudo primordial spirit treasure, it was just a novelty to him. Its true attraction was not that great. If he were to look at it from a different perspective, Taoist Wui should be thinking the same thing. Taoist Wui smiled and said, "Naturally, I want to trade with you. I heard that the place of opportunity you entered is a place with a rather strange method of entry. Now that I have the same opportunity, I want to trade some information about that place with you." Hearing this, Luo Fan suddenly came to a realization. Naturally, he understood what the mysterious place of opportunity that the other party had mentioned was. In terms of strangeness, there was probably nothing that could be more bizarre than that place of fortune, which could control a cultivator's memories and erase them seamlessly to the extent that it could even be used to enter the land of fortune. "What makes you think that I would remember the information within?" Luo Fan asked. Taoist Wui's eyes brightened. "I naturally couldn't be sure before, but now I am." Luo Fan only smiled. "You should have made up a reason. You can easily offend people with your words." He wasn't lying. If he understood Taoist Wui's words, then Luo Fan's actions just now could be considered as being tricked by Taoist Wui. If he was a bit more sensitive, he might even be enraged and use his emotions to decide things without regard for his own interests. Taoist Wui laughed. "What's the point of making up a reason, Taoist Wui? I can't hide it from you anyways. Moreover, I don't think you care much about this." Indeed, Luo Fan also smiled. Immediately, with a slight movement of his heart, his cave had already begun to recover. In the blink of an eye, it had already reappeared at the original location of the cave. At a glance, it looked exactly the same as before. "This isn't the place to talk. Please, Taoist Wui." When Taoist Wui heard this, he smiled and nodded. He followed Luo Fan into the cave mansion and stepped into the starry sky. As the structure of Luo Fan's cave abode that he liked the most, this starry sky was incomparably vast, and the arrangement of the countless stars faintly matched some kind of subtle principle, causing any living creature to be unable to help but feel relaxed and happy. This method wasn't too difficult, but it was quite exquisite. Even Taoist Wui couldn't help but sigh in admiration. "I do have some information, but I can't guarantee that you will remember it or that it will be useful," Luo Fan said. As long as there is information, it doesn't matter what it is. Taoist Wui was overjoyed. All right, since you are willing, then I am willing to make this deal. However, there is a problem, Luo Fan said. Hearing that Luo Fan agreed to the deal, Taoist Wui was overjoyed. At this moment, he said, "Is Taoist Wui's question my bargaining chip?" "That's right. In fact, I don't think fellow Taoist has what I want," Luo Fan said. He looked at Taoist Wui quietly, waiting for him to take out a bargaining chip that would move him. Since Taoist Wui had come, he had naturally prepared everything. He was also confident that the thing he took out would move Luo Fan. Of course, this was based on his previous understanding of Luo Fan. Now that Luo Fan had obtained such a change, and his strength had increased far beyond his imagination, he had already lost a little bit of confidence in the bottom of his heart. He was a little unsure whether the things he took out would satisfy Luo Fan or not. However, since he was already here, he naturally could not take out what he had prepared. At this moment, he only smiled and said, "What I am giving you is an opportunity to enter the path of a true sage. Another true divine path." Luo Fan's eyes narrowed at this moment. He noticed that Taoist Wui was talking about the true divine path, not the Tao Master path. This clearly showed that Taoist Wui's understanding of true divine was not limited to the Tao Master world. Chapter 2648. What do you mean? Luo Fan asked in a low voice. The other true divine path was very attractive to him. After all, different true divine paths took different paths. When one reached the 5th level of the Tao Master path, he would be able to condense the light of heaven and earth. After that, many developments will be derived from the light of heaven and earth. However, this did not mean that this was the only way, and it did not mean that this was the only way to become a true sage. In fact, there were many ways to become a true divine. The reason why the Tao Master Path was like this was because the true divine who created it wanted it to be so. In this way, the situation of the other true divine paths was very clear. They must have their own characteristics and must be very different from the arrangement of the Tao Master Path. Moreover, they must be able to guide living beings to the true divine level. Under such circumstances, if Luo Fan could enter the other true divine path, he would naturally be able to see another way to cultivate a true divine and another path to become a true divine. This would naturally be of great benefit to him in broadening his horizons. How could he not be tempted by this? You must know that the Tao Master Great World actually has some allies in the chaos. Taoist Wui said with a slight smile. Luo Fan naturally nodded to show that he was aware of this. For example, the Tao Master Great World would cooperate with other great worlds to open up some places of opportunity. This obviously meant that the Tao Master Great World had an extremely close relationship with other great worlds. If they were not close enough, such cooperation to open up places of opportunity would naturally not happen. And when a certain degree of closeness was reached, an alliance would naturally be established. Since the Divine Collection Bar is an alliance, there will naturally be many exchanges. Letting cultivators enter the other true divine path to cultivate is one of the ways of exchange. And I, by chance, obtain an opportunity to enter the other true divine path, Taoist Wui explained. Hearing this, Luo Fan suddenly understood. In his heart, he already believed what Taoist Wui had said might have happened. The reason why he believed her so easily was because he knew that this kind of communication was actually quite necessary. Even though he was not fully aware of the benefits of allowing cultivators from other worlds to cultivate on his true divine path, he knew that it would be a great stimulus to the true divine path. This kind of stimulation would definitely affect the path of a true divine. This kind of influence could be good or bad, but as long as it was a change for the path of a true divine, it might be able to gain something from it. Of course, this was only his guess. As for the specifics, he naturally did not know at this time. After all these thoughts flashed through his mind, he had already decided what to do. In fact, from a moment the other party proposed this bargaining chip, he had already made up his mind. He would definitely agree to this kind of deal. After all, No matter whether he wanted to leave the down master path or abandon everything here to enter the true sage path, he would never give up such a chance in such a place. Whether he would go or not was one thing. Whether he had the chance or not was another. Moreover, what he had to pay was just some information, and this information, to him, was just some of his memories. Even if he gave it away, he would not lose anything. Even if he had to exchange this place for a long time, it would still be worth it. At that moment, he directly nodded and said, "In principle, I agree to this kind of deal. It's just that I have some doubts." At this time, Taoist Wui's face was full of joy. As long as Luo Fan agreed in principle, everything would be easy to handle. Apart from the principle, everything else could obviously be discussed and compromised. Taoist friend, if there is anything you want to know, please feel free to say it. At this time, Taoist Wui smiled at this time. Hearing this, Luo Fan only said, "This opportunity should be very precious. Moreover, it will definitely be of great benefit to you. Why don't you use it yourself, but instead trade it away?" Hearing this, Taoist Wui only said, "Because there is only one place." Only one. When Luo Fan heard this, his expression slightly changed. Then it suddenly dawned on him. He had already remembered how he first met Taoist Wui. Back then, he met Taoist Wui because he had the tall pagoda continent. And what was the greatest use of the tall pagoda continent? Wasn't it to let the relatives and friends of the 5, 6, and 7 tribulations have the opportunity to catch up with them, to be able to cultivate and progress together with them? In this way, it was obvious that Taoist Wui had relatives and friends that he was unwilling to give up. If he left this Tao master path alone and entered another true divine path, wouldn't it be equivalent to directly giving up his relatives and friends? This was obviously unacceptable to Taoist Wui, who was willing to risk the danger of being hurt by this Tao master path to come to the 5th level of the Tao master path. At this moment, Luo Fan could only praise him. It seems that Taoist friend is quite lucky to have actually obtained more than one opportunity to enter that place of opportunity. Taoist Wui smiled bitterly and said, "It could be considered luck to have obtained one opportunity, but how can it be considered luck to have obtained more than one opportunity?" Taoist Wui smiled bitterly and said, "Getting one can be considered luck, but how can getting more than one be considered luck? Otherwise, to be honest, I wouldn't have been willing to trade the opportunity to enter another true divine path. Otherwise, to be honest, I wouldn't have been willing to trade the other spot to enter the path of true holiness to you." Hearing this, Luo Fan could only smile faintly. The trade can begin at any time. After smiling, Luo Fan said so. The transaction can begin at any time, Luo Fan said after laughing. Taoist Wu sighed in relief after hearing this. A joyful expression appeared on his face as he nodded and said, "If that's the case, then I will give the spot to Tao friend." Amidst this distortion, a mysterious force appeared out of thin air from all directions and began to rapidly approach Taoist Wui. Amidst this distortion, a mysterious power appeared out of thin air from all directions and began to rapidly approach Taoist Wui at this moment. At a glance, Luo Fan knew that it was none other than the power of the Tao Master's prison. However, before this power could truly descend, Taoist Wui's book of divine writings had already stopped. At this moment, the surrounding light had already calmed down and returned to its original state. At this moment, a strange combination of runes appeared in Taoist Wui's hand. This combination of runes was incomparably wonderful. Although it was only a combination of runes, it was more real than any living creature could imagine. Every rune seemed to be the most real and substantial thing in the universe, circulating in the rune cluster over and over again. It was as if the stars were revolving in the universe. How wonderful! Looking at this group of runes, Luo Fan could not help but exclaim in admiration. This group of runes was not just a group of runes. In his eyes, it was like a vast cluster of worlds that far surpassed all the worlds he had seen before. There were billions and trillions of runes in it, and the mysteries contained in each of them were more abundant. more profound, and more difficult to understand than all the principles and mysteries contained in any world or world. This object is a complete entity that cannot be divided. If any part of this entity is damaged, it will be fatal to this object. Taoist Wui sighed and said to Luo Fan. Looking at this group of runes, Luo Fan completely believed what Taoist Wui had said. This group of runes was not something that could be created by someone at Taoist Wui's level. Its level was far higher than that of a 7th tribulation expert. He even suspected that with his strength, he would not be able to cause any damage to this group of runes. Immediately, Luo Fan nodded and said, "I understand. This is everything I've seen and heard in that land of opportunity." With that, he condensed a group of spirit light that contained endless information and sent it to Taoist Wui. Taoist Wui was overjoyed. He handed the group of runes to Luo Fan and received the spirit light. The moment he touched the spirit light, Taoist Wui's eyes shone with surprise. He had already sensed the huge amount of information contained within the spirit light, and he felt that this transaction was worth it. Compared to Taoist Wui's joy, Luo Fan was also quite satisfied. The moment he touched the group of runes, he could feel the vastness of the group of runes. The number of runes wasn't just in the trillions and trillions that he had seen before. The number of runes had truly reached an infinite number. The infinite number of runes was compressed in an extremely mysterious way, and there was no sense of crowding between them. If one were to observe carefully, one could even see that there was an extremely wide space between the countless runes. It was like the gap between worlds. However, this ball of runes was only the size of a fist. Even Luo Fan would find it difficult to describe the mysteries of it. Indeed, the situation was as he had guessed. With his strength, he could not even shake the cluster of runes, let alone break it apart. "Taoist Wui, you think too highly of me." He could only sigh. Of course, even though he sighed, he still had a smile on his face. It was obvious that he could not be more satisfied with this transaction. "Taoist Wui, you're too humble. If it were any other Taoist on the 7th floor like me, I wouldn't be worried that they would destroy this item. But Taoist Wui is different. I still don't understand your methods, so I won't be surprised if you have the ability to destroy this item." Taoist Wui smiled. At this time, he had already roughly read through the information that Luo Fan had given him. Even though the effects of the information had already passed, and the situation in that world, or rather, the land of fortuitous encounters, had undergone tremendous changes, he still did not feel disappointed at all. After all, he didn't intend to look for a strategy. He only wanted to get information from Luo Fan so that he could have a general understanding of the land of opportunity, so that he wouldn't take a detour because he didn't know anything about it, or even go on a wrong path, making him and his relatives and friends miss the real opportunity in the end. He did not want to obtain the greatest opportunity through the information that Luo Fan had given him. In fact, he did not think that Luo Fan would obtain the final opportunity. After all, Luo Fan had only stepped into that land of opportunity for 30 million years. What could he do in 30 million years? To him, it would be difficult for him to even complete a small cultivation or adjust his breathing. Asking him to believe that Luo Fan could obtain the final opportunity in such a short period of time was as ridiculous as asking him to believe that an ordinary person could obtain strength that was comparable to his in a single night. Under such circumstances, he was still willing to trade with Luo Fan. This was enough to show how urgent his need for information about the land of opportunity was. In the end, the outcome of the transaction made him feel that he had made a huge profit. Even though the world had changed drastically in the end, and everything seemed to have been refreshed through the information that Luo Fan had given him, he had a relatively deep understanding of the restrictions of that world, the structure of that world, and the hidden secrets of that world. Apart from that, what made him even more surprised was that Luo Fan was actually involved in the final opportunity. Although Luo Fan did not add the information that he had obtained from the true saint's perspective into the memory, nor did he have the ability to put the information that the true saint had seen into the memory. However, He was also involved in the mysterious place in the depths of the world of laws. He even had a glimpse of the place where the projection of the rare treasure was. To Taoist Wui, knowing all of this was equivalent to laying out all the paths of cultivation in that world in front of him. What else could he be dissatisfied with? It was precisely because he was satisfied that he was in a relatively good mood. There was nothing that he did not like when he looked at Luo Fan. Chapter 26:49. Hearing this, Luo Fan was slightly stunned, and then he nodded in understanding. This object was extremely mysterious. Even if one did not use it, and did not use it to enter the path of a true sage, just the mysteriousness contained in this ball of runes was enough to tempt most cultivators. He even felt that Taoist Wui had obtained this mass of runes for a longer period of time than he had imagined. Before this, Taoist Wui must have used all kinds of methods to analyze this rune. So that's how it is. I understand. Thank you for reminding me. Luo Fan said. Taoist Wui smiled and said, as long as you don't mind my nonsense. My heart is already in a mess, so I won't stay any longer. Goodbye. Take care, Taoist Wui. Luo Fan smiled and said. After Taoist Wui said, take care, the Aura doppelganger had already turned around and left the cave residence that Luo Fan had specially opened. Then, with a sway of his body, he disappeared without a trace. It was as if he had never appeared in the first place. When Taoist Wui was completely gone, Luo Fan's mind directly cut into the mass of runes. In just a moment, an unknown amount of information flowed into his mind. This information was none other than the various simple and complex characteristics of the countless runes. Countless pieces of information converged in one place, forming some kind of extremely mysterious change. On the whole, it described the use of this group of runes. What was the other Dao Master's path that it pointed to? How to activate the magical use of this group of runes to enter the other Dao Master's path? What risks would be involved in doing so? Under what circumstances would one be able to return, and under what circumstances would one never be able to return? Almost everything Luo Fan wanted to know was everything about this group of runes. Through the characteristics of this kind of runes, information could be carried and transmitted. This was nothing new to Luo Fan. If he wanted to, he could do it easily. However, at this moment, he was still amazed by the mass of runes in front of him. Because at this moment, the information he sensed was clearly only the information on the surface of this ball of talismans. Don't forget that the number of runes in this mass of runes was infinite. The characteristic of the infinite runes was naturally that they were infinite. With the help of this characteristic, the amount of information that could be carried was naturally unlimited. Under such circumstances, even if Luo Fan spent the rest of his cultivation time on it, he would not be able to obtain all the information contained in it, let alone this little bit of time. It was precisely because of this characteristic that Luo Fan trusted Taoist Wui so easily. Only this kind of limitless uniqueness could be the manifestation of a true saint's means. I need to enter the 7th level before I can open up the path to another true divine path. What a pity. After briefly reading through the information on the surface, Luo Fan was slightly disappointed. From the information, he knew that if he wanted to use this mass of talismans and borrow the most fundamental power of this mass of talismans to enter another true divine path, it was not like entering the land of opportunity, where one could enter any area. Instead, it could be regarded as an extremely strict restriction. And this restriction was nothing else but that the cultivator must enter the 7th level of the Dao Master Path in order to be qualified to use this mass of talismans and borrow the power of these talismans to enter another true divine path. Before this, no matter how strong one was, it was impossible to activate it. Although he was a little disappointed, Luo Fan quickly came back to his senses. Anyway, for him, he had no intention of immediately entering another true divine path. After coming back to his senses, he had already guessed the reason for the existence of this restriction. The Dao Master Path had 9 levels. If it was divided into upper, middle, and lower levels, the first 3 should belong to the lower level. The 4th to 6th levels belonged to the middle level. After that, the 7th to 9th levels belonged to the upper level. Under such circumstances, cultivators who did not enter the 7th level, no matter how strong they were, could only be considered to be lingering in the middle and lower levels of the Tao Sovereign Path. Such a cultivator might be able to cultivate to an extremely powerful level, but they would definitely not be able to obtain the true essence of the Tao Sovereign Path. Their understanding and guesses of the Tao Sovereign Path would definitely be extremely different from the truth. If cultivators were to leave the Tao Sovereign Path under such circumstances and enter another true divine path, then what they would ultimately leave behind would be all sorts of misunderstandings about the Tao Sovereign Path. Such a misunderstanding would definitely cause all sorts of consequences in the future. Perhaps it would cause cultivators to look down on the Tao Sovereign Path and then look down on the Tao Sovereign World. Perhaps it would also affect the position of the cultivator after he became a true saint. Luo Fan was not sure what exactly it would cause, but just by casually guessing, he understood that this misunderstanding would definitely not bring about any benefits. Once a cultivator stepped into the 7th level of the Tao Sovereign Path, they would be considered to have entered the upper levels of the Tao Sovereign Path. Their understanding of the Tao Sovereign Path would definitely change, and this change might not necessarily mean that they had obtained the true essence of the Tao Sovereign Path, but compared to before, there would definitely be fewer misunderstandings. In this case, even if it would ultimately lead to all sorts of bad consequences, it would still be much better than before. With all these thoughts in mind, Luo Fan had already put aside this restriction and began to dig deeper into the various information contained within the rune. The information contained within the rune was infinite. As long as Luo Fan had enough energy, as long as his methods were high enough, he would be able to dig infinitely deeper. As Luo Fan dug, more and more information was revealed within the rune. The explanation of how to leave the Tao Master's path and enter the true sage path with the help of the talisman became more and more detailed. In the end, even the choice of time, the specific location after entering the true sage path, and the corresponding relationship between the method of activating the talisman could be found. The deeper he dug, the more curious Luo Fan became. He was curious about what kind of information would be contained within the deeper levels of the rune. Unlimited information. This sounded simple, but it wasn't that easy to achieve. Even if it was a carrier that could carry infinite information, it would still be a huge problem to truly select infinite information to pour into it. At this time, the information contained within the rune was infinite. At this time, what he had obtained was all the methods to use and display this rune. Next, even if he could continue to go deeper, it would only be temporary. After going deeper for a few more levels, the information related to this step would eventually come to an end. Then, after this information had come to an end, what other information could be dug out from the rune? Regarding this, the deeper he dug, the more curious Luo Fan became. With Luo Fan's wisdom and means, it went without saying how easy it would be for him to dig out information from this mass of runes. Naturally, the smoother it was, the faster it would be. In just a few days, Luo Fan already felt that his work of digging out information from this rune had reached a certain limit. After reaching this limit, he felt that his understanding of this rune had reached an extremely profound level. In fact, he even had a deep understanding of the principle of how this rune protected its user when it was in a state of chaos. He also had various guesses as to how to leave the other path to the true sage realm. This had even surpassed what he had gained after studying the methods to enter the land of opportunity for millions of years. In order to obtain all of this, he had only paid the price of studying this rune for a few days. This difference made Luo Fan occasionally recall this, and he could not help but sigh with inexplicable emotions. Reaching this depth also meant that as long as he broke through this level, his curiosity would be satisfied. What other information does it contain behind this? With this thought in mind, he continued to explore the depths of the rune and continued to stimulate the information contained in the depths of the rune. As he continued to explore and stimulate, very soon, the answer that he was curious about appeared. It's actually information about the other path to the true sage realm. When the truth of the information surfaced, Luo Fan could not help but be surprised and enlightened. He was surprised that there was actually such an incredible mystery hidden in this rune. On the other hand, he was enlightened because if the information about the other path to the true sage realm was inserted into it, then the unlimited information would be a matter of course. A true sage realm could even guide a cultivator to become a true sage. An existence like a true sage was omnipotent, omniscient, immortal, and undefeatable. No matter how strong a cultivator was below a true sage, the difference between a true sage and a true sage was as huge as the distance between heaven and earth. The mystery of such an existence could naturally only be described as unlimited. At least, in the current scope of Luo Fan's understanding, it could only be described as unlimited. Under such circumstances, as long as a part of the true sage realm was taken out, it would be enough to meet the unlimited information requirements of this rune. After satisfying his curiosity, Luo Fan did not completely give up on the study of this rune. Instead, he went one step further and studied this rune more seriously. This rune contained information about the other path to the true sage realm. Obviously, it could allow him to understand the true sage realm before he entered the true sage realm. Compared to stepping into the true sage realm personally, the harvest might be much smaller, but it was still a considerable harvest. The other true sage realm was quite amazing. Its structure was completely different from that of the Tao Master realm. The Tao Master realm was divided into 9 levels. Once one passed through the 9th level of the Tao Master realm, there was a great possibility of becoming a true sage. However, the other true sage realm was different. It was not only divided into 9 levels, it was infinite levels. That's right. Not 9 levels, not 99 levels, not 999 levels, and definitely not 9,999 levels, but infinite levels. The number of levels on the path of true divinity was constantly changing. As long as a cultivator could enter any of the levels, the true sage realm would naturally give birth to another level. Even though it was already the 999,999,999 level, it was still the same. Of course, this infinite level structure caused the cultivation method of the true sage realm to be vastly different from the Tao Master realm. However, it did not specify how many levels one had to pass to have a high chance of becoming a sage. In other words, it was not as strict as the Tao Master realm in terms of which level a cultivator could step into. For the true sage realm, which level one could step into depended on one's own cultivation and the path one was willing to take. Although the deeper one went, the more profound and mysterious the mysteries would be, and the better the cultivation environment would be. The gap was much smaller compared to the path of a Tao Master. It could be said that in the true sage realm, the biggest difference between each level was not the level, but the suitable cultivation path. This structure also proved that it was impossible for a cultivator to walk the entire true sage realm. This also determined that if a cultivator wanted to jump out of the true sage realm, it was impossible for them to walk to the end of the path. Instead, when they became a true sage, they would be able to jump out of the true sage realm. Regardless of who it was, at that time, which floor were they on? Even if it was only the first level, they would be able to jump out of the true sage realm. In this way, it was obvious that the true sage realm's tolerance for cultivators was far greater than the Tao Master realms. If the Tao Master realm's path was said to be some kind of torture for the cultivators who had cultivated for countless years in the 9th level, but for the cultivators on the true sage realm's path, no matter how long they stayed in it, they would be able to see new things and find new interests. Perhaps it's more suitable for cultivators to walk the righteous path, but it's not suitable for me. As his understanding of the true sage realm deepened, Luo Fan's heart gradually came to this realization. The path he walked was against the flow. Compared to the righteous path, his cultivation speed was faster, but there were many tribulations. This caused him to be unable to be like those cultivators who walk the righteous path, able to use unlimited time to accumulate their own progress. If that was the case, the true sage realm's path, which had infinite levels and the span of each level was not large, was obviously not suitable for him.